We're going to be breaking down Andrew Wilson versus a feminist Oliver on the Whatever podcast. It is going to be psychically damaging. It is going to hurt your brain. However, it's also probably going to be very funny. I'm going to pause intermittently in order to break it down. I, of course, if you don't know already, am a never Trump Republican. I do have some fiscal and social conservative instincts, but I also don't, hate gay people or black people or trans people. So nobody really knows what to do with me. And frankly, I don't know what to do with myself either. So without further ado, let's get Mr. Andrew Wilson, a debate darling of the red pill right and a Christian nationalist, and Oliver, an espoused feminist, on our screens. And let's see what they have to say for us today.
Told Jim Bob there's nothing wrong with having sex with a cadaver.
Awesome start. Let's, okay. That's a part of the opening statement, so we're just going to have to let that fly. Gross.
Usually that would be enough for me to just kind of laugh and walk away because no one will ever take you seriously again. But in this case, I feel the rest of his pro-feminist stances need to be eliminated. My opponent also refuses to define what a woman is, so I don't know how he can bother advocating for their specific rights or issues if he can't even determine what one is. Interestingly, my opponent believes there are no specific duties for men, at least according to his debate with Jim Bob. So I thought I would take a moment to, I'm sorry, hang on. I'm doing this from my cell phone, so give me a little grace. Interestingly, my opponent believes there are no specific duties for men, at least according to his debate with Jim Bob. So I thought I would take a moment to point out the societal and social expectations and duties which men have. Now, you may not believe they should have them, but they do have them under the current expectations which feminists have put in place. First, the draft. Second, any say over abortion, which the left demands they have no say in. The ability to deny association with women in the occupation for the purposes of safety. The ability to defend yourself physically against a woman. The social demand of sacrifice for chivalry to strangers who are women and children. The expectation they can't tell women what a real woman is, but a woman can descriptively attack what a real man is or isn't. Men have a bias against them in domestic violence issues. Men are expected to approach women for the purposes of dating and marriage, but are often called creepy and told they are making a woman uncomfortable by doing so. Men can't discuss issues they have with women in a collective way, or they're called misogynists and told they want to hurt women. Expectation to provide financial support during a divorce without the expectation of child custody. Expectation of having courage in dangerous jobs for the purpose of society where women are not. Expectations that male-only spaces like the Boy Scouts and clergy and other groups be opened up to women, while women, especially feminists going into all female spaces, are completely celebrated. The inability to bring charges of SA or battery against women for the same types of things. Women can claim battery and assault and be believed, and it's insisted that they're believed, just to name a few. Men are expected to be stoic, while at the same time more emotionally available and empathetic. Men are sent to schools governed by female teachers, which have rules which are tailored to the behavior of the feminine in girls and not the masculine in boys, and are oftentimes drugged to keep their masculinity under control. To celebrate male increases in powerful jobs is bigotry and oppression, but in females, it's celebrated as glass ceiling breaking. Also, feminist things that we'll see often in society now, which have taken heel from the left, is men need to stop coming in women, not women need to stop opening their legs. There's almost no mutual assurance here when it comes to promiscuity in women. Most importantly, men are always the solution to any problem, even if they are the problem or aren't the problem. Men need to fix the porn problem because they watch it, even if women are the ones making it. Men need to get other men in line. Men need to be more XYZ. Men need to stop the simping, not women need to stop enabling simps by simp fishing. Women always appeal to men's behavior as the problems which need to be fixed, ducking all accountability thanks largely in part to the leftist males who want to fuck them. Next, let's examine some actual blatant stupidity, which will be the first thing I destroy my opponent on.
This is... Andrew's given us a lot to work with. I'm excited. Should be fine. Now, the problem is that I'm going to have the classic masculine bootstrappy attitude, which I'm sure drives, some red pillars crazy, but hopefully some red pillars hear me. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this down. When it comes to lefties talking about harm, because I'm assuming that this is what this is. Like, I don't know what the necrophilic reference was in the opening of the debate, but I'm assuming it's a reference to harm. We'll see if Oliver addresses it in the debate. But the truth is that lefties and liberals need to stop doing this, where if you can't describe a harm, then you have to say that it's like morally neutral. We all know zoophilia is gross. We don't have to describe a harm in order to, say that zoophilia is gross. Same thing with necrophilia. We all know it's gross. We don't have to have like a 10-page thesis paper on how it's actually okay. Let's stop doing this. Let's be normal. And if there's liberals or progressives who feel like they need to Reddit soy debate bro go out in order to defend necrophilia or zoophilia on some kind of like principled debate basis, stop. You're being a freak. You're making your side look like a freak. Just accept that these are antisocial behaviors and just move on, right? No need to defend any of that kind of crap. I understand that Stephen Bonnell, Destiny, he made it interesting by having these like long form debates, but who cares? Move on. Be normal. No specific duties for men, but there are duties. Okay, I'm interested in this because I do think there are duties for men. Men do have the duty for the draft. They don't have a say in abortion. I do think that one, I'm actually going to bold out the ones that I do think are messed up. I think men, like ultimately women have to be the deciders of what they're going to do, because you can think of situations where men could abuse their station in order to compel women to have children that they're not interested in having. However, I do think that it needs to be culturally normalized for men to have a say in it, because let's face it, there's probably a healthy chunk of fathers who were told that they had no ability to have any kind of say in the choices of what their girlfriend or wife was going to do with a pregnancy, and they might regret that. And maybe the wife or partner regrets it as well, but they have this like giga progressive thing like, no, you need more money, you need more stability, you need this, you need that. And it's like, no, you don't. You can be broke. You can be broke and have children. I don't know if you know this. I am broke. I have children. Okay. So children are expensive. There's no doubt. Having a home is expensive. No doubt. Keeping up with your bills is hard. Working your butt off in order to make ends meet is hard. But at the same time, it's infinitely more worth it. I would rather spend time with my 2 children, with my expensive house, and by the way, it's not like a mansion. It's like a normal house. But with my expensive house, I would rather spend time in my house with my children, with my wife, rather than going out and drinking and trying to hook up with 25-year-olds. So yeah, suck it up, Buttercup. It sucks, but being broke is fine. DV discrimination is a thing, but I also just think that in general, men are going to be we're going to argue that we're on average more physically powerful, right? So if you're on average more physically powerful, then you shouldn't smack women around, relatively speaking. Now, if she comes after you with a knife, you do what you got to do, right? Now, divorce without expectation of child custody, I think that is changing culturally. I do think that's good. You're expected to approach women, but you're going to be called creepy. I'm going to say go ahead and give your pair a tug. If we want the species in order to propagate, then you're going to have to approach a few women. They're going to have to think you're creepy, and you're going to have to say, okay, well, just walk up to them and be like, hey, miss, can I buy you a drink? My name's Connor. Nice to meet you. What's your name? What's your degree? What's your job? How are you doing? And if you get good vibes, then you keep talking. And if you get bad vibes, then you walk away. It's easy peasy. Then fraternal societies are opened up to women. I do think that this is cringe. Charges of sexual assault are automatically believed with women, but they're not believed with men. I think that is changing over time. Men are expected to be stoic and emotionally available. Okay. It's hard to do, but it is possible. I'll describe later for the sake of time. I want to let them continue to talk, so I'm not going to yap fully. But then education is biased towards females. I think that's a real problem. ADD drugs are sex biased. I do think that's a real problem. Females don't have a shame associated with the promiscuity. I think that should be changed. Men are always the solution. Men need to police each other. Men need to police simping. I think that's just true. Okay. It's true, but it's good. Stop simping. Okay. So these are the problems that I say are real that need to change over time. These are the problems that Andrew is describing that I think are okay as is, or men do need to take primary responsibility for them. That's how I've divided up these arguments. Real quick, Peter Mars looks like he's having a passionate comment. No way. I'm genuinely surprised, and I'm also curious as to who this woman must be to agree to be with a guy like that. Disgusting chain smoker. Hey, listen, I used to smoke cigarettes. So rude. Christian Blair says she might leave a super chat in this debate. Lol, she is Andrew's biggest cheerleader. Well, don't we want that kind of support? Don't we want a woman to be a man's biggest supporter? You know? Harstar says, good morning, slut. Good morning, right back at you. All right, let's continue with the content. Peter Mars, before we do, though, says, I think the problem is a lot of younger guys are learning how to behave from the internet. This is true. That's why we're here.
My opponent claims that women's fear of men is justified, and their bias around a collective experience is what justifies it. Well, the obvious contradiction here, of course, is that I seriously doubt he would say bias against black people or fear would be justified based on white people's collective experience. Watching him try to reconcile that is not only going to be amusing for me, but it's where I'm going to begin my line of inquiry. When Jim Bob asked about the bear question based around race, he twisted himself into a pretzel to attempt to justify that the collective experience of one group was valid, but the other was not. What's so amazingly hilarious about this is it shows you just how weak the leftist position really is on this front.
DJ Isolated says, if you have a mortgage that's a loan combined with mandatory real estate tax and insurance, homeownership is a myth. Very few people can pay for a home outright and not care about rising taxes. DJ Isolated, you are going to hear me say this multiple times, and I'm not trying to be mean this early in the debate or conversation. Give your pair a tug. You got two options, okay? Your option number one is renting. So if you're renting, you are subject to the whims of the market. And as any renter can tell you, they've effectively had their rent doubled in the past decade or increased by 30%. They've had no opportunity to increase their wages correlatively. And so as a result, they're just taking a hit to their grocery budget. So that's your other option, is renting. When it comes to home ownership, it is true that you are still going to be paying real estate tax and insurance, but there's something called homesteading. In Florida, where I live, there's a homesteading where effectively your property taxes can only go up 1.5% per year as long as you live within the residence. And then what was the other thing that you said? Real estate tax and insurance, homeownership is a myth. Insurance is necessary in order to guard against catastrophic damages. You can also forego insurance, but then if your house gets destroyed and you're living inside a destroyed house, then it is what it is, right? Now you can't do that without. If you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. But if you don't have a mortgage, then do whatever you want. Nobody cares. And if you want to live in a shack in the woods, nobody cares. So do you want to build equity and have generational wealth where you can pass on? What's going to happen is I'm going to pay off around $300,000 worth of value of my property. And then when I die, if this property is worth $500,000, I'm going to be able to split that between my 2 or 3 kids and split my property into $50,000 to $100,000 down payments for my children to get a good start towards their properties. And when they pay off their properties, they're going to be able to pass it off to their kids. I know that you've probably heard from Stephen Bennell or other like random people that actually what you need to do is hustle grind set in an apartment and then do stock portfolio investments because they perform better than mortgages. I think they're very R-slurred. I don't know if Commander Haircut is here, but I think they're very R-slurred. The equity of homeownership is one of the greatest vehicles for passing on intergenerational wealth. 70% of like intergenerational wealth is probably related to equity from a home. Christian Blair says, how did you smoke when indoors like a true addict? No, absolutely not. I think that's so trashy. I think smoking indoors is hella trashy. And they give you cancer, but what doesn't these days? Don't smoke tobacco. It's a waste of time. You're spending money on drugs that don't even do anything to your body, but give you a little bit of a heart attack. Harstar says, I rent, but my last 2 landlords have been amazing and not raised my rent. Excellent. Mortgages alone, absolutely. Better than burning money, though. Yeah. True degenerate behavior. Smoking inside is crazy. DJ Isolated says, I have a mortgage in great equity, still took out as a loan. 2 banks came and bought my mortgage, rearranging terms. Okay. And you're still better off than renters. 420, blaze it, guys. Yeah, if you're gonna inhale any kind of drugs, don't do something that actually like does something, you know? Don't have a schizophrenic meltdown, but don't smoke tobacco. It's a waste of time, energy, and it kills you. Anyways, he's still on the intro. Peter Mars and DJ Isolated just said interesting things, so I wanted to address them in chat. Continuing.
They selectively show that they back up the idea of group bias worse than the right does by acknowledging that group experiences are justified unless those experiences don't fit in with their version of political action. They are unjustified then. This is such a blatant contradiction, it's staggering, and also it shows the primary weakness with intersectional feminist worldviews like my opponents. What happens if we do intersectionality only to find out minority classes oppress or show hatred towards the majority class, thus justifying the hatred of the majority towards the minority? Well, in my opponent's worldview, this is simply not a possibility. He's willing to entertain, and this is because it destroys the entire narrative of the oppressor-oppressed dynamic from which all of his views reduce to a silly harm reductionist principle. Unless, of course, it comes to the collective power of women. Then one man can easily oppress 20 women, and the minority can oppress the majority, but somehow this is impossible with racial groups or other dynamics. Further, let me just finish. I'm almost done, and I'll give my opponent a little extra time if needed for his opening. I'm sorry, real quick, just finding my place. He believes people have a duty to pay taxes, but can't tell us why there would be that social duty, but not a social duty of reproduction, which is by far the most beneficial aspect to the health of the society, especially its elderly. He claims women have no duty.
Nestor Caceres brings up an interesting point. I like the video. Please clap. Everybody clap for Nestor Caceres. And also, please like the video yourself. We already have a couple of donations this morning. It is very much appreciated. Like the stream if you haven't liked it already. Sub if you haven't subbed. Follow if you haven't followed. Dono if you feel like it. Let's go. And then Sacred Snow says, Destiny's point is that home ownership being the largest middle-class investment is bad because it incentivizes NIMBYism and that we should shift away from that as a society if possible. It disincentivizes affordable homes. What? No. And we could do that, but I don't want to get into a protracted property ownership debate at this time. So if he thinks that everybody should just be a rentoid and everybody should live in urban, densely packed urban housing, it's because he's an urbanite. And he's been an urbanite for way too long. And he thinks that, and by the way, like I know that he's going to have a more sophisticated take if we talk about it. But I think that he's effectively giving advice to professional young men who make a ton of money. If you're an urbanite and you want to live downtown and eat at fancy restaurants and hook up with Instagram e-girls, then renting and living downtown and having good investments is probably good for you. However, if you're a normie and you want to marry one girl and you want to hook up with one girl and you want to have a family and you want to have a stable job and you want to pay something off and you want to live in one community and you want to throw down roots, then buying a house is better. Okay? I don't like this. Sorry, you're just kind of triggering me into a rant. I don't like this contrarian bullshit where effectively what's going on is we have like generations built up around systems that offer obvious advantages. And then a contrarian has to come in and say, well, if you follow my 10,000 IQ plan, then you can do it better and accumulate more wealth and therefore be better off. 70% of the audience, no offense to you guys, everyone in my chat is 3,000 IQ. We already know this. All of you guys are brilliant and have exquisite taste in content. Okay. Now, that being said, 70% of people in chats in general, not here, you're all brilliant. 70% of people in chats in general are very dumb and they cannot manage the kind of sophisticated investments or have the attention to detail and research capacity in order to manage not just a 401k, but also like do specific investments that give them high ROI. They want to throw their cash into a retirement fund and forget about it. And that's me too, by the way. Harstar says, I think buying a house when you're settled is a no-brainer, but if you're young, your risk adversity should be lower and putting money into stocks makes more sense. Once you have a family, I think priorities flip. Harstar just said what I took 2 minutes to say. He said it in 5 seconds. So everybody applaud Harstar. Excuse me. Oliver keeps blinking because he can't believe this isn't a circle of hell. Well, it might be. Java Man says, yo, what's up? And I say, yo, what's up back to you. He could have just said that girls are lame, icky cooties, spreading, and annoying. I mean, that's true. Stephen Blackrock Bennell. Yeah, he's too neolib for me. I get accused of adopting some neoliberal economic policies, and I think that Destiny takes it way too far. We should all rent so home prices become more affordable. Lol. Well, conservative liberalism, that's kind of my reaction as well. Mick Smack says, I think it's not an argument that you shouldn't own a house, but more that you should view it as an investment, but instead as an item of use. Sure. I'm sure there's a steel in there somewhere. How about you just build more homes and push for decentralized workplaces? Yes. What if I don't like no girls? Well, good for you. Good for you for liking boys, I guess. DJ Isolated says company towns are making a comeback and many people will be lured to them. Imagine your boss and landlord being the same. Yeah, that'll be fun. Yes. Yes. Okay. All right, let's continue before we get distracted by the housing discussion.
To have children, which means he sees no duty to keep the human race alive, which aligns with his harm reductionist mindset as the ultimate harm reduction, in which there would be no human beings, thus no harm could ever happen to any of them. He believes democracy is the finest form of government, ignoring the glaring weakness that we can democratically vote for no democracy. He has typical left world stupid views. The progressive mind is totally tainted by ignoring objective reality for the ideas of untenable systems and senseless ideology. On the core of feminism, he's just as bad, refusing to denote that if he were actually a harm reductionist, the best way to reduce harm would be to strongly encourage traditional gender roles, because men, who are the most fit sex for the workforce and jobs which aim to protect society, would obviously do the most amount of good in those capacities, and women in the nurturing capacities, leading to better general outcomes for society. Now, the truth is that he wants there to be a genderless, equitable society which does equal promotion of all lifestyles and worldviews, even if it is detrimental to the very society in which we live in, which, by the way, just isn't an anti-harm reductionist principle, even though he claims he's an anti-harm reductionist. It's also stupid, and it ignores the nature of people altogether for the purpose of ideology. He claims he's against the draft, but is for compelled taxation, which makes no sense. Both would be duties to protect and run the society one is in. He's basically a walking contradiction. All of his views are contradictory, and with that, I'll yield my time.
Since Andrew went a little bit over, Oliver, you're welcome to have additional time for your open if you'd like. Go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, Andrew, for that opening statement. Thank you, Brian, for having me back. It's good to be here. So the resolution that we're debating, I guess we've kind of agreed on, is whether feminism is good or bad for society. I will be taking the affirmative claim that it is good for society. So, two things that are important when we're having a conversation about feminism and good is to kind of define both of those terms. So the way that I'm going to be defining feminism is, and this is not an exhaustive definition, and there might be some development on this, is the belief that individuals should have equal rights, freedoms, and opportunities regardless of gender, and that barriers based solely on gender should be dismantled. The way that I'm defining good will be kind of a constellation of good. So it's going to be kind of a lot of things that feminism benefits or that feminism leads to, and a lot of these things I'm going to presuppose are good because I think a lot of the audience will be sympathetic to these being good. These include things like stronger families. This includes things like healthier families. This includes things like reproductive autonomy. This includes things such as greater economic output. I have stuff to back up all of this, the idea of stronger families in shared responsibilities and shared parenting, healthier families in reproductive autonomy, and parental leave and workplace protection. So something like parental leave is associated with reductions in infant mortality. It improves maternal health and long-term child well-being. Reproductive autonomy is linked to healthier pregnancies, lower rates of maternal depression, better childhood nutrition or better child nutrition, and immunization rates. And Medicaid expansion was something that was pioneered by feminists, which led to maternal coverage of things such as childbirth, and it narrowed disparities in health outcomes and birth outcomes and improved access to prenatal services. We can move on to some of the economic benefits. So, for example, dual income households, where there are two individuals who are working, are significantly more protected against poverty and food insecurity during economic downturns. Feminism advocates education as well, high-quality childhood education programs. For example, for every $1 invested in these high-quality childhood education programs, we get $16 in return. This was given by Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman. And the benefits to children of working moms from the Harvard Business School show that daughters of working mothers earn 23% more than daughters of stay-at-home moms, and their sons also spend 7.5 hours more.
Sorry, hold on.
show that daughters of working mothers earn 23% more than daughters of stay-at-home moms, and their sons also spend 7.5 hours more per week caring for the children that they end up having. So just in general, I'm going to be affirming that. I'm going to be arguing that feminism is a good for society based on these constellation of goods. I'm not necessarily defending a worldview here today. I'm merely defending that these things are good and feminism contributes to these things that are good. So these statements are ultimately conditional statements. So if you care about greater economic output, if you care about a decreasing infant mortality, then you should care about feminism and support feminism as a good for society. So that is all I have for the opening statement.
All right.
We open?
Yeah,
Open
go ahead.
dialogue.
Can we start? Let's back up real quick with your, I just want to write it down word for word. What's your definition for feminism?
Yeah, sure. I got it for you. So the belief that individuals should have equal rights, freedoms, and opportunities regardless of gender.
Hang on.
Okay.
Belief
Sorry.
individuals should have.
Yes.
Hold on. You guys are already so negative, man. Harstar says this guy is boring the F out of me. Well, Andrew is going to eat this guy alive. Andrew's making Ethan Klein faces. You guys are savages. No, I'm perfectly fine with what he said. And by the way, I think that some of this, there's like 30% of it that I think is probably liberal cope, but I think that 70% of it could actually be argued from a socially conservative perspective. Why wouldn't we want stronger families with better parental benefits? Why wouldn't we want to incentivize having children and being able to support those children? Why wouldn't we want to reduce infant mortality through social care? Why wouldn't we want improved maternal and child health? Why wouldn't we want shared responsibilities in the households? And I think that there's a bunch of schizoid rightoids who actually think that they're going to find their base tradcon waifu and they're just going to make them breakfast, lunch, and dinner and do the dishes and clean up the house and take care of the kids and all that kind of stuff. And that is not a realistic relationship, in my opinion. Okay. So my wife does take on a disproportionate amount of the household duties. As a matter of fact, you just watch me eat a breakfast sandwich that she made for me. So, you know, she does take on a disproportionate amount of cooking, cleaning, etc. However, when there's a rat that needs to be chased away from the trash can, that falls to me and the dogs. When it comes to taking the trash out to the curb, that falls on me. When it comes to the dishes have been piled up for a day or two, that falls on me. When it comes to wiping butts because she's already done 3 diapers today and my son just had a blowout turd, that's on me. When it comes to watching the kids while she goes out in order to run errands, that's on me. So this whole fantasy of you're just going to be able to slough off old domestic responsibilities to your tradcon wife, I almost guarantee you that Andrew doesn't even live like that, right? There's this whole fantasy that's been propped up for like NEETs and red pill and black pill guys that they're going to find the right woman and she's just going to cater to them hand and foot like some kind of Hispanic mom. And it's just not going to happen. So yeah, and even if you have a Hispanic wife, she might do more domestic responsibilities. But if you take advantage of her doing more and then you're a lazy partner who doesn't help her out with anything, you're kind of a piece of garbage, right? So yeah, this whole thing is a fantasy, in my opinion. This debate is boring. Oh my God, Christian Blaris, with that attitude, he defined egalitarianism. Meh. Andrew is going to win though. Okay. Let's let them get into it. Maybe he'll laugh like Ethan Klein. Maybe he'll be mean. Maybe he'll brutalize him for our entertainment. Can you allow Andrew to cook, please? Because Andrew will be rude as hell, but we'll try to make real points amongst it. Among us, okay? Grassroots says, day 4 of me asking Connor to let me gift him memberships. Okay, I'm going to take this. Snip. I'm going to snip it. And I'm going to pass it off to my editor because he's enabled memberships. Oh, that's not it. He's enabled memberships, so I don't know why they're not, gifted memberships aren't a thing. So sorry. This is important, chat. Sorry for the delay, but Grassroots has asked me 4 times. And I parasocially love him, and he is very kind to the stream, and he gives lots of dollary dues. So if he wants to gift y'all memberships, That way, maybe you become $5 a month supporters of the stream. Then I want to enable his graciousness. So I sent that to my editor 2 seconds ago. Harstar says, you're a public speaker, entice people just as important as being right. I mean, that's probably true, but you know, Oliver, what? You want him to like flash? You want him to flash you real quick? You want, during a debate about feminism, you want Oliver to be like, woo! What do you want? What do you want, bro? Trad wife for me, but not for thee. Listen, my wife isn't trad. She's trad Irish, okay? And she's not even Irish. But you know, like I don't even know if this is a stereotype, but you know how in, what is it? It's not Tangled. It's Brave. So in Brave, there's a red-headed Scottish princess who talks mad amounts of smack to her mother and to her father. And her father, while being a Scottish Highland Viking barbarian, also has like a very fierce wife who will put him into line when it comes to being more noble and civilized and caring about his daughter and all that kind of crap. That's the trad Irish relationship. The trad Irish relationship is like, yeah, the man's a barbarian. He's gross. You know, he's basically like one belch and fart, perpetually walking around the house, belching, farting, and picking boogers and all that kind of crap. But then the wife will snap you to and effectively tell you, hey, stop doing all that stupid shit that's making my life worse. Please, for the love of God, help me. And if you don't, I'm going to put you back in line. You know, that to me, that's like a trad relationship, at least from like an Irish ethnos. Irish women don't take any shit. Christian Blair says, also, Connor couldn't stand to watch more than 10 minutes of the FNF episode. He won't want to listen to dumb thoughts. I mean, you're not wrong. Sheila says, Andrew asked like a child throughout this debate, insulting the other guys. The show thinks debate is cool. No real solution, just complaining. Cool. I'm still not over the fact that Andrew is married in the first place. Well, he found his tradcon waifu who supports him. DJ Isolated says, whatever is pivoting to poning dumb young broads as entertainment has a shelf life. I mean, for me, it definitely does. I can only do like 10 minutes of that. Walms Blanc says, would you go on whatever podcast in the Fresh and Fit in the future if you had the chance? Of course. Of course I would. Grassroots says, aren't you effing savage? You just gifted a bunch of memberships the other day to Nick's channel. Oh, yeah. See, and Peter Mars is calling you out. I didn't know if that was Nick, but I know that I cannot complain. Grassroots has been more than generous to this channel. I cannot complain about how nice Grassroots has been to this channel. However, Nick is going to buy another Rolex. Now, that being said, you know, Grassroots took me aside and he's like, hey, man, I'm giving you money because you entertain me, et cetera, et cetera. And Nick entertains me. So I can't hate. But, you know, like I would rescue a dog, right? I would rescue a dog. Nick's just going to buy another Rolex. Peter says, I've gotten gifted. Yeah, Grassroots is a great dude. I ain't none of your fathers. Okay. All right. I'm talking a little bit of shit. I'll reel it back in. Sacred Snow says, base, thank you for your generosity on stream chat, Papa Hegemon. Yeah, he's my J-Mac, and I parasocially love him for his generosity to the channel. He's been very nice to the channel. Mixback says, to be fair, it's opening statement, so they haven't even started. Yeah. Conservative Liberalism says, it looks like gifting memberships is down a couple from super chats. No. Grassroots, it looks like conservative liberalism is saying that gifted memberships are available. So I don't know. Yeah. But Nick deserves another Rolex, bro. You know what, Peter? I'm talking shit. I shouldn't. When I'm done with stream, I listen to Nick Diorio, so I can't really talk too much smack. Would you collab with Andrew in the future? Of course. As a matter of fact, I think I DM'd him about the woke right thing, and we're gonna talk soon about that. Anyways, we've been yapping. Chat's been distracting me with yapping. Let's continue with the content. We are still in opening statements. Somebody pointed that out. So let's see if it gets deeper.
Equal rights, freedom, and opportunities.
Would you guys like to define any other terms here at the start? Or
Yeah, hang on. There's a few that I want to do. It should have equal rights and what?
Freedoms and opportunities.
Okay, Grassroots says, bahaha, I stacked out the weekly maximum again. I need your PayPals immediately. My PayPal email is counterpointsconnor@gmail.com. I'm putting it into chat. You know, you don't have to give me anything, grassroots hegemon, but if you feel so inclined, Did you see Soy Pill's reaction to your Tim Pool appearance? No, I didn't, BizD, but if you want to summarize it for me. I'm always interested in hearing about people's reactions to my streams, but I'm never going to watch them because I am vain, but I also cringe a little bit to watch my own content. It feels like too much vanity. Harstar says, no, wait, it's actually Harstar. Don't listen to this fake Counterpoints guy. True. All right. All right. Interesting chat theories popping up, which is Peter Barr says, imagine the twist that Grassroots is actually an OnlyFans girl who enjoys the content. So what happens is, if I were to give you a shit pile of money, can you gift a shitload of subs? Of course. And then Peter Mars says, imagine the twist that Grassroots Hegemon is actually an OnlyFans girl who enjoys the content. That's what we need to do, okay? So OnlyFans girls sweeping all the money from the Sims who can't get a real relationship, so they feel like they need a parasocial relationship with an e-thought, so they give shitloads of money to an e-thought. What we need to do is we need to somehow recruit the e-thoughts back into the politics streaming area so we recoup that money on behalf of mankind, male kind, if you will. Christian Blair says, as a streamer, you probably got to get over that. IT's drama, therefore it's good for the algorithm. Sure. You mean the back and forth, like the reply guy content? Sure. All right. Sorry. Let's continue.
Freedoms and opportunities.
Yes. Regardless of gender.
Well, that'd be regardless. Well, I guess
sex and gender.
Sex, right?
Yeah,
Regardless of sex. Okay. Regardless of sex. And is this, do you consider this to be a proprietary definition or a historically apt definition?
I'm just providing the definition. If you disagree with the definition, then we can go back and forth and determine which definition we feel is best, or the audience can decide which definition they feel is a better definition.
Yeah, I understand that we can decide that which definition we want to do. I'm asking another question though.
Okay.
It's not a trick question.
Okay.
Is the definition, do you consider this to be proprietary? Meaning this is what Oliver believes feminism is, or do you think that this is a historically accurate definition?
I mean, I think it's a combination of both. So I think, yes, it's the definition that I'm putting forward. It's
and what historical, if you're looking at it from a historical standpoint, what would be the kind of like idea that you would draw this from for what feminism is?
I mean, various feminist thinkers who proposed definitions of this nature. Betty Friedan is one of them, who wrote a book.
Walnus Blanc says, would you do a stream with your wife and do reaction videos together? Not really. I have no problems working with my wife, and if she wants to create content, I'll create content with her. But I don't want to put her on the spot and subject her to the spicy chat messages that I get from people on Twitter. So, BizD said, Soy Pill basically said that you and Tim pivoted whenever Econ Boy brought up a strong stat or argument. I don't think so. I think I acknowledged whenever Econo Boy brought up a strong argument. The primary pivot that I would say happened during the debate was we said that in order for a welfare state to function properly, you needed an enforcement mechanism. And I brought up aspects of Switzerland and I brought up aspects of Singapore. And then Econo Boy said that that's not necessary because the fraud is so limited within the welfare state already that you don't really need enforcement mechanisms. But that's not true. So he can say that out of 100 people who take welfare, only 95 of them justifiably want welfare. And so you spend more money chasing down the 5 than you do actually, like preventing them from taking welfare in a predatory or parasitic way. You spend more money trying to hunt them down than you do if you just let them be on the system. That was his point. But that has nothing to do with what could be considered anecdotal evidence, but still obviously socially destructive evidence. If you look at California in Los Angeles, there's an entire subculture of thousands of homeless people in an area where they've camped out downtown. They've taken over the entire area. There's drug use, there's murders, there's homicides, there's all sorts of bad shit. And there's poop, fecal matter, and needles on the street. That's not a healthy, happening, functioning society. You need a social enforcement in order to remove that. And the truth is, liberals and progressives are too nice to do that. Same thing with the Pacific Northwest. They have the same problem. Same thing with, I'm trying to think of like Portugal. Portugal experienced this, where they had a pretty generous drug rehab program and it was working pretty well. But then because it was inefficient, they privatized it. So then they hybridized it. And as a result of that hybridization, they effectively incentivized drug consumption in public. And so now they have the similar issues to the United States, where they have like shanty towns set up on sidewalks where people are pooping on the street and using drugs. So he can say, oh, well, compared to the entire problem of poverty and homelessness, it's not that big of a deal. But that's a relative statement. If you live in those communities, if you live in the neighborhoods that are being affected by these homeless populations that are given generous welfare benefits, but then effectively become perpetual parasites that then poop on the street and use drugs on the street, that's a problem, right? So I don't agree with, Econoboy just kind of hand waving that and saying like, no, social enforcement isn't that big of a deal because 95% of people on welfare need it and they're actually not being parasites. Okay, that's true. But we still have all those secondary and tertiary consequences. Excusame. Sacred Snow says, oh, fudge. Is he set up just to play? I only have to debunk your definition card. If it does do that for a prolonged period, then we'll move on to the Black Gal. Voided Parrot says, yes, I've locked it out several times. I think it's roughly 1,000 a week. Jeez, boy. Oh, I'm sorry, dumb. This is Counterpoints. It's Valor that can't accept my gifted memberships. Yeah, probably. We live on Counterpoints right now, brah. Speaking of which, Valor shout out. So we're live on a channel called Valor Media Network. So I am live once a week on my home channel, which is Counterpoints, but I am live another 4 days a week on Valor Media Network. So if you want to hang out with me another 4 days a week, then type in Valor Media Network into your search bar and you'll find me there, and I'll be live from 9:30 to 2:30. I think you talked to Econoboy without Tim there. Tim talked way more than you. Yeah, Tim was kind of having the memes of like, we need to beat people and we need to send them to fat boot camp. I don't want my tax dollars going to the poors. And it was kind of like, all right, like I'm sure this is red meat to your audience, but this actually isn't policy. But, there's an entertainment aspect. Like somebody was saying that Oliver was too boring in his intro. That's probably why we've been talking with chat for half the runtime so far. Louis Salazar, he says this while working in downtown where homeless people are at. What, Econoboy? No homeless people in Singapore, though? Yeah, probably because they beat them. Hey, just woke up and I'm drinking coffee. Excellent. Good to have you, brother. Portuguese shantytowns sound worse than Spain's Roma hoods. I agree. Grassroots says, if Valor wants me to gift them hundreds of schizophrenic subscribers, yes. Yes. That's the plan. Would you react to Hassan Bad Empanada debate on Stream in the Future? I already did. I did it yesterday on Valor Media Network. It's being cut up into a segment right now. Are you always duo streaming Valor and Counter? I should duo stream. That's what I should do, Grassroots Hegemon. But the truth is that a majority of my audience is on my home channel. Like I get between, typically by the time I end stream, 50 is like a normal day on Counterpoints. But I would say that if it's a spicy drama, it's between like 70 and 100. And then with Valor, I'm normally jumping between 40 and 50. So the whole point is to try to migrate as much of that audience over to Valor as possible, not to compete with myself effectively. So I wouldn't want, 70 people on Counterpoints and 2 people on Valor. I want people on Valor. Oh, okay. Louis Salazar said that you have a buttload of homeless people. Understood. Okay. What is Valor? Oh, God. Guys, come on. We got to get back into the content, but I appreciate chat's passion. Valor Media Network is a channel that I am working for that is all the content on there is produced by either first responders or military veterans. They're trying to create better content for young men. That way, young men become good men, and then good men become good aspects of the Republic. And so it's backed by Midas Touch, but it's not politically specific. It is anti-MAGA. Almost everybody who works there is anti-MAGA, but there's plenty of Republicans and there's plenty of Democrats. So if you like Republicans and you like Democrats and you like centrists, and if you think that men have a bad shake through Andrew Tate, Andrew Wilson, and Nick Fuentes, then you should check out Valor Media Network. Okay. Walnus Blanc, you keep asking me how many styles of content I would do. The answer is, if I can do a style of content and it's profitable, yes, I will do it. I hope that answers a majority of your questions. But does Valor have any communists? Not really, to be honest. If your Valor channel gets hacked, does that mean the hacker would have stolen Valor? All right, let's go. Let's go. You guys are very passionate, which I appreciate, but you're distracting from the content. Stop being interesting and funny.
Called The Feminine Mystique.
Okay.
We can talk about various other individuals who contributed to that. Sally Haslinger put forward definitions that are very similar to this, but that's kind of what I would say is there. So it's kind of a combination of both.
Okay, got you. And then you utilize utilitarianism for good?
That's not the position that I'm defending here. So no, I'm not defending what good is in this debate. These are conditional statements in that, for example, greater economic output is a good thing. If greater economic output is a good thing, then feminism helps achieve that goal. I'm not ultimately defending what essentially good is. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of
I'm not looking for a moral debate saying what is good and bad. I'm just looking for the.
Yes, he is. And I'm sorry, I'm going to call Andrew out a little bit. Andrew does love doing I don't even know if it's called like ontological or epistemic. He loves rooting everything where he's like, well, if you're an atheist, how do you even know what reality is? How do you even know what good and bad are? How, isn't it all just relative if you're an atheist and you don't have a defined moral system? And then I think in conversations with Andrew Wilson, I've said, I think that you can observe morality through nature. And then ultimately, like, religion is the processing of a whole bunch of subjective experiences into a pooled objective wisdom, like a pool of objective wisdom. And then he was just kind of like, well, then it's just all subjective then. And I'm like, no, it's not. And then we just repeat that ad nauseum for 3 hours.
The viewpoint that so if you're saying that these are conditionals for what is good or what is bad. Well,
Grassroots says, every dollar I've ever spent on YouTube came directly from Xander Hall's PayPal. Sorry, Zan, but that's a funny meme. For those of you who don't know, Xander Hall is a lefty streamer who used to be a Vosh orator who had his PayPal hacked and had a buttload of it transferred to a Steam wallet that he was not able to recover. And then also his ex-girlfriend was yoinking super chats from his PayPal as well. So effectively, Grassroots Hegemon just claimed responsibility for about a year's worth of drama. That's awesome.
What would make them conditional for what is good and bad? Just somebody else believed that conditionally they were good and bad?
If someone disagrees that, for example, awesome, greater economic output is a good thing, or that stronger and healthier families are a good thing, if they disagree and think that those are not necessarily good things, then so this is conditional on if stronger families and healthier families are good things.
Do you believe they're good things?
Yes, I do believe they're good things.
Okay, so how do you make those ascertain? How do you ascertain that? Through utilitarianism?
No, not necessarily through utilitarianism.
Okay.
I'm appealing to generally commonly held beliefs that I think most people are sympathetic to, and I'm moving just from that. Share.
And I did get a $10 donation from, excuse me, let me see. I did get a $10 donation on PayPal from Mr. Daniel. So thank you kindly for that.
Shared premises, hopefully.
So general beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So like shared intuitions?
Sure, we can go off that. Just, I think a majority of people, I mean, I don't know, we can ask the audience, think that stronger families is a good thing, healthier families is a good thing, reducing childhood poverty and things like that are good things. So that's kind of what I'm basing it off of.
So shared intuitions.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And that's what you're basically, when you're saying good and bad, you're saying based around, just make sure I got it clear, based around the shared intuitions of me and most people. I think most people would agree that these things are good.
Sure, for the purposes of this debate, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So AD for $20. Thank you kindly, King. You guys are being very generous today. Owning equity in your home should be a part of your wealth, right? I also have a Roth IRA and a Roth 401k, so I max out both. 100%. But where I get frustrated, AD, is that, number one, a lot of people in the world right now are just working class. And what I mean by that is they pay their bills. They're lucky to get groceries. They're lucky to pay for their cell phone, power, gasoline, car note, car insurance, and they're lucky to be able to get back and forth to work. And they're lucky, if they have kids, they're lucky to be able to afford their kids to put them through public school and to be able to feed them, clothe them, and maybe do an extracurricular like karate or soccer, which is like $50 a month. And then they're also lucky to pay their, Netflix subscription, right? And so it seems like 60% of the population is in that boat where they're just surviving. And so I would even put myself in that boat for substantive amounts of my professional career, because as my income has raised up, my expenses have raised up as well. And so as a result, I did max out my 401ks, but now I'm in private employment, and I'm not doing anything with retirement right now because I'm just paying bills in the hopes that we can build up a content library over the next 6 months where we have enough like ad revenue coming in from the pre-recorded videos that boom, I can go full-time, and then I can just crank out content. And then the money is just like exponential, where of course, Grassroots Hegemon and other people like JMac and other donors are going to make me rich through super chats. However, we also have so much ad revenue that even if everybody stopped super chatting, I would still be able to pay my bills. That's the dream. Whether or not that's going to happen, in 6 months, I could be going back to work. I have no idea, but that's the dream, right? Now, when it comes to the average normie who has a white collar job and they can pay their bills and they have extraneous income, I don't think that they should be spending it on all video games or Rolexes are stupid. Like Nick DiOrio spends stupid money on watches, but he has the money to do so. And I'm presuming that Nicholas DiOrio has enough money that the Rolex is an extraneous expense after he's maxed out his 401k, after his mortgage is paid, after his car note, his insurance is paid. So if you have the economic capacity to do those kinds of things, then of course you can get into the more advanced game of investments. However, again, 60 to 70% of the population is just surviving. And so I'm not going to tell them, don't buy a house, rent better, and then grind out through investments. People who are working at Taco Bell don't need to buy $10 worth of stock because it technically has a higher ROI than a house payment. What they need to do is they need to get educated, and then they need to get a mortgage. And then from that wealth, they need to build more wealth. And then they need to get a retirement account. And then they need to start doing stocks. It needs to be incremental. Excuse me. So blah, 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 blah. You guys don't like Andrew so far. What's your profession? Well, right now I'm a full-time streamer. So I used to work insurance. So I did, real quick, just because I love the parasocial questions. I love talking about myself. When I was 15, I started working. I worked at a car wash and I worked at an Albertsons, which is a grocery store. I was a cashier and cart boy. Then I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I did supply, logistics, and project management in a 4-year career. Then I got out, I got my 4-year degree. Took me 5 years, but I did it. And I worked restaurant industry almost the entire time. I also moved, like I was a mover for a couple of months. There were some odd jobs in there, but I mostly worked restaurant industry. Then I was a law enforcement officer for 4 years. Then I got out and I did insurance for 4 years. Then I did construction administration for 2 years. And then just recently, I got a job doing YouTube full-time. So we'll see if I can make this last full-time. If it lasts, awesome. If it doesn't, I'm still going to be doing YouTube as a side hustle. Diet Coke or the hard stuff? Diet Coke for me. I don't do hard stuff. Dude math, yes. Andrew Wilson does not live in Cali. I think he lives in like Missouri or something like that. I don't remember. All right, anyways, let's go.
I'm not claiming that whatever the consensus believes is automatically therefore correct. I'm just claiming for this debate, I'm appealing to these shared premises and intuitions that I think most people will hold.
Most people believe this. Okay. All right. And then I think there was one more thing. When you say conditional,
yeah.
So you're saying the conditional belief, I just want to make sure I got this right. This is based around the condition that people agree with you.
Agree that things such as stronger families are good, that healthier families are good.
Which are things you believe.
Yeah, which are
so
things I believe.
So it's people who agree with you.
Yes.
So then conditional here means people who agree with me.
The belief is conditional on if you believe that stronger families is a good thing, or if you believe that healthier families.
Yeah, this feels like debate pedantry, but that's okay. Let's let him cook.
Is a good thing.
Which you
then
believe.
yes.
Okay.
So that's why it's conditional. If you don't believe,
I'm going
those
to
are good
fast forward
things,
that though. I don't
then
like
of
the
course my
debate
argument's
pedantry.
not something to it.
What?
That they're related. Of
Yeah.
course, then if they're related, then they shouldn't be in that relationship. The same way that if they're like abusive,
No, you wouldn't
then they
even.
shouldn't be
No,
in it.
that standard wouldn't even apply. Like if somebody was fourth cousins to somebody or third cousins, you probably wouldn't care. So it's
What do you
not just the relational aspect. In this case, though, there's no harm which is applied that I can detect if it's two consenting adult men, right? And they're
No. This is the second time he's done this. All right, sorry. I'm sorry for pausing. I'm trying to get into the meat, but these number one, chat is being interesting and funny, so I keep talking to chat. So we're not getting through the content because of chat. I blame chat. If you want to join chat, they're having a great time. And then number two, Andrew Wilson. So a decade ago, Stephen did this line of argumentation where he talked about gay twins having protected sex and how do you judge if incest is bad. And he effectively used that in order to stomp on a bunch of debate bros for how they define good and bad. And then Andrew Wilson does this thing where he inverts it, where he takes it to liberals and progressives who would ostensibly be for, they don't care about any behavior that doesn't cause harm. And then he gets them to adopt a freakish position, which is like gay incestuous sex between twins is acceptable because it doesn't cause demonstrable harm. And so he uses Stephen's own like freakish logic, not in order to win a debate, but actually, I guess in order to win a debate. But the more important thing that he's doing is he's making his debate opponent look like a freak in front of the audience. It's pretty funny. Like, it's terrible. I don't want to watch 10 minutes of it. I will move this forward. But hello, darkness, my old friend. Yeah, that is savage. Oh, man. Dude, Walnus, I'm going to tell you this because I appreciate the passionate questions, but you're asking a lot of them, and I do have content to review. Do you think the future in AOC or Jon Stewart or Bernie Sanders or Jasmine Crockett or Cory Booker or Tim Walz and Josh in the future for president in the future? I think AOC is the only person who would probably get run, and I don't know if she would make it out of a primary. Jon Stewart won't. Jasmine Crockett won't make it out of a primary. Cory Booker could make it into the primary. Tim Walz could make it in the primary. If you're talking about Josh Shapiro, I think Josh Shapiro will probably be running in 2028. So I think all these people could be primary. I don't think they're charismatic enough to do it. However, I need the questions that you're asking or comments that you're making to be related to the content that we are reviewing so we don't get distracted and so we can actually make it through. Can you receive $500 at the same PayPal I paid for the gun with? Yes, 100%. Yes, Grassroots. And I will be sure to turn it into gifted memberships for the chat. I will make it rain. Memberships. Yeah, if a tree commits incest and no one is around to hear it, is it morally neutral? Dude, this is exactly what's going to be. AOC ain't ever going to be president. I didn't say she would win a general. I'm saying she could win a primary.
in a relationship and they're both brothers. Why shouldn't they be able to adopt, dude?
Well, I mean, if you want to get into a conversation, I don't want to get into a conversation around the ethics of incest. I think that
It's not a conversation around the ethics of incest. It's a conversation around the idea of alternative lifestyles being somehow better because you promote alternative lifestyles, right? You don't have justification to stop other alternative lifestyles.
So once again, just because I say that there are certain alternative lifestyles that are a possibility, it does not entail that I think every single alternative lifestyle
That's
is
fine. So tell me what your objections are to this alternative lifestyle. What?
I'm not really sure.
You don't know.
Wait a second. No, but wait, Andrew.
Okay.
I haven't looked into if there is research behind 3 people raising a child. I know there's the phrase that it takes a village to raise a kid.
Great. So let's try this a different way. If 2 brothers adopted a child, they were in an incestuous relationship, they can't reproduce. You agree with that, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And let's just say that there was a trial run where there was 5 of incestuous brothers that were tracked. Okay.
Well,
and we were able to, and it's a low sample size. There's probably not that many. But let's just assume for a second that the outcomes of the children were good. And all the available data said the outcomes for the children were fine. Would you support that?
I don't think so because I don't know how I feel about the idea of 2 brothers. It's not the fact that they're because I think if they're in a relationship, like, are they just raising a child together? Are they
also having sex with each
in
other?
a romantic?
Yes.
I think then you're mixing, for example, like normal familial relations with a type of.
My wife just walked in and said, "What are you watching?" I'm watching Andrew Wilson.
Romantic and sexual relation. I think there is research on this that shows that if there is that type of relationship that happens in an incestuous relationship, it does kind of pervert the meaning of family and that type of.
I see, but not when it's two homosexual men.
I don't necessarily think so.
Why?
Because I don't think that
you would just be basing both of these arguments on stigma.
What do you mean on stigma?
Well, you say that if there's a social dynamic which is not there, but you can't point to any direct harm to the child, you would just be pointing to social stigma.
I'm not necessarily going on a harm principle here.
What are you going on?
What am I going on?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going on the best interests of the child, but that's not just harm.
The best interest of the child. Harm. What other than stigma here is actually problematic here?
What's other than No.
Okay, I'm fast forwarding because I'm not gonna watch them dance around gay incest. I'm gonna talk to Andrew about this if we do talk. Where I'm gonna be like, listen, dude, I'm trying to listen to your debates, and the gay incest analogy is annoying as hell. Soko, thank you for becoming a member. It is greatly appreciated. Love him or hate him, Andrew Wilson is good at this. Well, he's good at forcing people to discuss gay incest. Yeah, 100%. R-Star says, does Andrew realize he could literally just dog shit argument about literally everything? Yeah, I'm fast forwarding. I'm not going to watch Andrew Wilson. I'm not going to watch Andrew Wilson talk about gay incest for 15 minutes to make liberals uncomfortable. It's funny. It's not worth 15 minutes of my life. You're watching two gay men kiss over a table, except one of them feels bad about it now and the other won't feel bad about it until later. Well, that's what it feels like. All right. Bud123. What is Andrew Wilson even trying to debate? Bro, so we have a liberal feminist. We have Andrew Wilson, who's a Christian nationalist. They're here to debate about whether or not feminism is good for society. But because Andrew Wilson likes rooting all of his debates in like the fundament, in the firmament of reality, he has to talk about like, because he roots his morality in Christianity, because he believes that the Bible is correct. Don't fast forward, it's the best part. You would think it's the best part, Vlad. You would be in my chat talking about the Jews and the gays and the transes and how they're degenerate for society and this, that, the other. And then you would be like, you have to watch the gay incest part. Bruh. Okay. You guys are crazy. Yeah. You guys are crazy. Okay. Anyways, the whole point of this is that if you only use harm as your evaluation of reality, but different people have different definitions for harm, how do you eliminate things like gay incest from society? And what I would say is that at some point I'm okay with a certain level of intuition informing our ability to make moral judgments about behavior, right? So this line of argumentation, this Jedi mind trick doesn't work on me.
Wait a second, but it's not.
Of course not.
It's not based exactly
Would she
on
be considered more feminine, in fact, by the fact that she's taking care of him while he's so sick, she's doing her wifely duty?
I don't think necessarily. But I don't think you can also ascribe masculinity and femininity to these rigid like categorizations of things.
Yeah. So what is it? What is it then? What is masculinity? What is it?
I don't think there is a comprehensive thing. I actually agree. I don't think that masculinity and femininity are good categories to go off of because it reinforces already gendered norms there. So I'm not really positioned.
Well, let me give you a counter then.
Okay.
The reason that we utilize masculinity and the reason that we utilize femininity is because we're ascribing virtues to men and women, and they're shared virtues. So you would agree with me that courage is a shared virtue between men and women?
Yes, but
hang on.
Okay.
You would agree with me that temperance, shared virtue. You would agree with me that, generosity, perhaps shared virtue, things like this, right?
And they aren't exercised differently.
What's that?
And I don't think they're exercised differently.
I'm not even saying that.
Okay.
So let's start with
shared virtues.
So you agree that they're shared, right?
Yeah.
But here's the problem, and here's where we get masculinity from. If it is the case that one sex does or does not apply one of these virtues, the social cohesiveness and the destruction to society drastically increases in comparison to the other sex. Meaning, let's take courage, for instance. Okay. Now, if females, right, lost courage when it came to, like, I don't know, dealing with intruders and things like this, right? If courage was not kind of on the menu there for social protection, right? Society would get objectively worse.
Yeah.
You would agree, right?
I think so.
But
Yeah,
if men lost courage, there wouldn't be fucking society at all. And so that's why it's ascribed as a masculine virtue, because if men don't apply this virtue, society fails, or if women don't apply this virtue, social cohesion and society begins its collapse.
Okay, fine, but I don't see how that necessarily boxes things into masculinity or femininity. I think if women started not,
how does it not?
hold on, I think
How does it not, bro?
Can I explain?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I don't think that if women just suddenly stopped expressing courage, it depends. We'd have to define what courage means. Like, what if women, by courage, you know, you're courageous, maybe a woman doesn't want to get out of bed and raise her child.
Definition.
Okay, fine. If she doesn't want to take care of her children, if every single woman decided they weren't going to take care of their children, and let's say, I don't know, breastfeed their children, do the normal things that you would ascribe that women either ought to do in their role, I think that would lead to the downfall of society.
Well, let me give you an easier one. Temperance. Just take temperance, for instance. Temperance is necessary for both sexes in order to even have virtues to begin with.
Sure.
But if women become hysterical versus when men become hysterical, the side effects of this are much, much worse when men become hysterical versus women. Yeah.
Why though?
Because they're way fucking stronger.
I also think they exercise their hysteria in a more violent way.
Because they're way fucking stronger.
I don't think just because someone's stronger necessarily.
When women are hysterical, they become very violent, just like men do. The distinction is they can't do as much damage.
Okay.
And so if that's the case, then when we look at this virtue, for instance,
I don't even agree with this. So, and by the way, something very cool is about to happen. So, Grassroots, thank you for the very cool thing. But I do want to do the cool thing instead of describing the cool thing. Also, reminder to like the stream. Okay. Then where is that button? Join membership. And then I think once I join, I can gift, right? So anyways, I'm going to work on this. Okay. But the, excuse me, the point is that hysteria, obviously, like, physical strength is going to be a calculation. When he's talking about hysteria, he's just talking about people like having like schizophrenic freakouts effectively. When men do have schizophrenic freakouts, they can do more damage because they're stronger, but also I think there's a temperamental issue as well. I think between adrenaline and estrogen, there can be instinctive responses, one towards aggression, meaning that you're attacking other people, and others towards like self-destruction, which I think can be a little bit more, you know, less related to testosterone and aggression and all that kind of stuff. So I don't feel like this is a complete picture. So while he's kind of saying like, well, we associate virtues with different genders, which I accept, and that if a virtue disappears from one sex, it's not as detrimental as if it disappears from the other sex, which I accept, then therefore we can make these differentiations between masculinity and femininity. That argument stands, but I also think that Andrew Wilson is being insufficiently nuanced while acting like he's completely confident in what he's saying. So let me, I'm going to screw with the memberships on the background while I let these guys continue to chat.
If men lose control of that virtue, it's way fucking worse than if women do, right? That's why it's masculine versus feminine. Virtues are associated with the masculine and the feminine.
Okay, so I'm just curious on the view. What would be a virtue that, I guess, if women lost that virtue, it would be worse for society
Chastity.
than men?
Explain. And we can expect, I mean, we can dive right into it. So chastity would be an easy one.
Okay.
So men, for instance, they can impregnate basically like as many women as they can make a deal for, right? As many as if there was 100 women who were lined up here today and you could have sex 100 times, you could impregnate 100 women.
Sure. We're assuming they're consenting
I think you'd be shooting dust at some point, but okay.
to the sex.
Yeah, you could actually do that, right? But you agree that women can't. They can only get pregnant by one man at a time.
Yeah, sure. There is a difference.
So then
there.
if that's the case, then when we're talking about the social cohesion, right? Women are basically going to be the gatekeepers of whose DNA passes on and whose DNA doesn't pass on. You agree with that?
How are they the gatekeepers, though?
Well, because you can have as many children as you want.
Sure.
They can't.
Yes.
Yes, they can't. So they get to basically be the selection for reproduction, not you.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? They get to be they get to be kind of the gatekeepers for who gets to reproduce and who doesn't get to reproduce. Whereas you, right, you can just reproduce with like everything that you saw, as many partners as you could arrange for who would agree.
Mhm.
You could actually impregnate all of them, right?
Sure, but then you
So
would,
for
you would
women,
probably also
if-
agree they shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
though,
yeah.
right?
So if women aren't chaste,
Mhm.
right? If they're not chaste
Mhm.
and they have sex with like 50 men,
Mhm.
right? At least this used to be the case, especially, then paternity comes into question. Other things come into question, right? Not really the case with men. If you
How
had
not?
sex with 100 women,
Yeah.
right? And no other men had sex with them, right? Or 100 men had sex with this woman. And what are you doing, dude?
Bring me water.
Oh, fuck. This guy's like fucking shifting
water,
behind me.
yeah.
I'm like, what the fuck is he doing? Fuck. All right. So where were we at?
But
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So conditional, we're talking about the gatekeeping of female pregnancy.
Okay. I just don't see how it's different in terms of like men would have questionable about paternity if they have
How?
sex.
How would they have questions about
with 100 women?
paternity?
Wait, are you assuming that only one man is
Mhm.
having sex with these 100 women, or all of men are having sex with 100 women?
Yeah, yeah. So if it is the case that a woman has sex with 20 different men, right? It is the case that paternity is going to be in question, right?
Sure.
That is indeed the case.
Paternity is going to be in question. Yeah, paternity is going to be in question.
Yeah. So if we go back, the reason I'm tying this in with virtues, the reason I'm kind of moving from the back end to the front end
Sure.
is to explain this concept to you.
Mhm.
I wish I had home math skills so I could draw this out. Let us assume for a moment that you wanted to be assured that your child was yours and
Okay.
you didn't have paternity tests.
Okay.
How could you do that?
In the old, like, I guess a long time ago.
Well, it's not that long ago. Paternity tests
sure.
are modern.
Fine. And you want to be sure of it?
Yeah.
I guess then only you would be having sex with your wife or something like that, or you would want to have sex with a woman who wasn't actively having sex with other men at the same time. And I think that's perfect. I think that's a perfectly normal boundary.
So wait,
to
hang
have.
on. What is the last thing you just said? You would want to make sure what?
That you and your wife were the only people having sex with each other.
Right.
I think there's nothing wrong
And
with
what would
monogamy.
what would be a good tell for that?
What do you mean?
That she wasn't having sex with a lot of men before you, right?
Wait, no, I don't necessarily think that's
You
the
don't think
case.
so?
No, I don't think so. I think people can engage in a lot of sexual activity because
Mhm.
they're enjoying that, and they enter a monogamous relationship and decide that that's what's best for them, and that's what they want.
Well,
I don't.
Okay, so we have, give me 1 second. We have gifted, and everyone I'm not going to continue the content until we all thank Grassroots Hegemon, because Grassroots Hegemon, I'm going to go full screen for this, is a very kind soul who supports the channel. For some psychotic reason, he says that I entertain him, which is awesome. And he has a decent job that gives him a decent amount of wealth. And so as a result, he is willing to share that wealth with the chat. And so he has gifted 95 memberships because 95 memberships because like PayPal takes a little bit out of the thing, and I wanted to make sure that I maximize as much money as we possibly could. So I'm sorry if you did not receive a membership, but we have gifted more memberships than there are people in chat. So I have no idea how YouTube distributes memberships. So if you didn't get one, my apologies. But Grassroots Hegemon effectively just gave the channel $500 out of the kindness of his heart. He's, obviously parasocially loved because that is a crazy amount of money. It is a crazy amount of generosity. I'm actually like, I'm tearing. Like I'm not going to cry, but I am tearing up a little bit that somebody is willing to back the channel that hard, Like we have other people, Sapient Green, Pondering Politics, AD, K-Soko. We obviously have people who are very generous to the stream. Gen X was another one. All those people have been incredibly kind to the channel over previous weeks. But of course, grassroots kindness is phenomenal. So it makes me tear up a little bit. Shut up. So anyways, so the point is, if you did receive a membership, enjoy it. If you continue your membership into the future where it's $2 to $5 a month, it is appreciated. I think that's part of the reason why they have the gifted membership button, is so that somebody can gift it to you, and then if you choose to perpetuate it, you can. And but there should be 95 people who have membership now, and I just want to pause for a second, enjoy the moment, and appreciate Grassroots Hegemon for being so kind to the stream. That's amazing. Can I have an honorary wrench? Of course. How do I promote you? Ban user. Thanks for the memberships, guys. Bye. No, I'm joking. Let me go to the channel, and then of course you could have a wrench. As a matter of fact, I'm probably going to give. How do I do that? Grassroots. I'm clicking on your name. All right, I'm gonna let the content flow while I figure out how to promote Grassroots. So, anyways, but that is a ton of generosity and parasocial love and appreciation. So, thank you for Grassroots. I'm gonna let this flow. I'm gonna give Grassroots mod, and then he's gonna be able to ban all of you.
I think that just because she chooses to have a lot of sex outside of a relationship means that she should automatically be distrusted within a monogamous relationship.
So let's just make sure we got this right.
Is it same for men, though?
We're going to set this.
And sorry, I am with Andrew on this one, where I think that promiscuity in youth isn't everything. That I think that when you're 15 to 25, oftentimes people are just promiscuous because they're young and they want to have fun. They want to figure stuff out. They want to have multiple partners, et cetera, et cetera. But I do agree with Nevin just texted me. I do agree with Andrew that these are typically correlated behaviors. So if you're promiscuous in youth, it's probably a higher indication that you'll be promiscuous later in life. That being said, we all experience a little bit of a downturn in sexuality as we get older. So just because you're a whore when you're 19 doesn't mean you're a whore when you're 50. Now, if somebody had like a 100-person body count, would I be looking to wife them up? Probably not. But if somebody is under 10 and they had a slutty summer when they were, 19, do I care that much? Probably not. So it can get too extreme in both degrees.
No, it's not. But I'll get into that next.
If a man has sex with a bunch of people, and he gets into a relationship,
I'm going to explain
should he be distrusted?
I'm going to explain it.
Okay.
But let's move into this because we're talking about the social destruction aspect. So let's start with this. You think that it is the case that if a woman has a promiscuous past, right, that should essentially not in any way men should show no distrust towards that woman for the purposes of having a family with her.
Hold on. Was she in relationships with people, and was she lying to them, and was she cheating on them?
She was just having a lot of promiscuous sex with many, many men.
Then that's fine. Well, I guess we're assuming also like no STDs, no stuff like that.
We're just baking it.
Okay, fine. Then yeah, no, I don't.
There shouldn't be any trust distinction at all.
No, I mean, you have conversations with this person. Be like, yeah, no, I had that past. I enjoyed that part of my life, but I want to settle down now.
And would you say that those women would probably be on par with trust of like virgin women when it came to that? Right.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that this is statistically borne out that effectively like people with reduced sexual partners have less sexual partners throughout life, are less likely divorced, et cetera, et cetera. I can Google it momentarily, but I'm assuming that's where Andrew is going.
Right. It follows, right?
Sure.
Except it doesn't, because you didn't think about it, and here's why.
Okay.
There's if I were to ask you about comparisons, right? Comparatively, if a woman only has sex with one partner, can she compare any other partners to that man she's had sex with?
No, I guess not.
So she wouldn't be knowing what she was missing out on or not missing out on, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So then if that's the case, if a virgin got married, right, she would have no other men to make comparisons against for any potentiality she might be missing out on, correct?
Hold on. Yes, but then you're claiming that you should marry virgin women because there might not be another guy, or they're not going to have a reference for another guy who's better at having sex than you are.
Or better at whatever the traits are. So the more that...
Yeah, but this is a double-edged blade. For instance, I'm not saying that this is always going to be the case, but as an example, Carissa Avalone and Hunter Avalone's relationship, which I'm not bringing up in order to dog either one of them, but I do think it's an example. They got pregnant when they were very young. They got pregnant and decided to stick together. I think Hunter left temporarily and then came back and all that kind of stuff. Well, Hunter Avalone or Carissa Avalone, in as far as what I know about her, does not have a super high body count, right? So she should be the person that Mr. Andrew Wilson is talking about. But she, because she didn't have any references for what sex was like with other people, is she fantasized about crazy sexual scenarios that she probably wouldn't have really been interested in participating in if the reality was fully upfront. But she fantasized about very extreme sexual scenarios that ultimately led her away from her husband because she had no reference. And so while I do think that a lower body count is probably preferable for the health of a long-term relationship, I do think that Andrew is projecting this like virtuous, virginal woman with no reference who doesn't know whether or not it's good or bad, and therefore that doesn't lead her to fantasize about anything, which I think is kind of crazy. Yeah, exactly. Bud123 is pointing at it. If a woman body count is low, then a woman with no body count may question whether the grass is greener on the other side. Yes. Sacred Snow says, I don't like this argument. If you're a virgin, you don't know what you're missing out on. I'd say that the virgin versus promiscuous cheating stats are skewed by religious morality, just a guess. Probably. Yeah, well, right. And then Void Apparent kind of cuts to the heart of the issue saying, wait a minute, is Andrew suggesting that men exploit the naivete of women? Isn't that a bit unethical? And I would say he would probably argue that the societal health and the stability of relationships outweighs whatever ethical violation you have by experienced men violating or taking advantage of the inexperience of women. But still, like I would say that having this expectation that they would have no fantasies about other relationships, I think is crazy. If a woman's body count is high, that means she's a loser. I mean, it can. I would see them as correlates. Mixnack says, also need to question if the low count is by choice. Well, hey, Mixmax actually brings up an interesting question, because if you have a low body count because you're like a femcel, you're like a volcel or an incel, that's one thing. But then if you're like a Chad or a Stacy that everybody wants to date, but you just restrict yourself out of some internal sense of virtue, then that's different. So yeah, that's actually a good point, Mixmax. That's a good point. I think Often Topical says, I think we're reading too deeply into the truth of the matter than Andrew lays mediocre pipe. I disavow. Okay. Andrew, I've heard, I'm going to do my Trump impression. That'll be terrible. It's like, no, I've heard that Andrew is the best. He's the best at laying pipe. Andrew's one of the best pipe layers ever. I've heard it on the streets. I've heard it on the streets that Andrew lays great pipe. So no, I disavow. Y'all are being rude as hell. All right, I'm gonna let the content flow while I'm still looking for how to do the mod thing. Jeez. All right, hold up. We got to make a joke. Audacity says that's not how you complete, sweetie. Andrew Wilson. And there's this great Twitter meme where, God, should I find it? I wonder if I should find it. I'll Google it off screen. That way I don't get in trouble. But there's this great meme. If God doesn't care about the female orgasm, why should I? It's this internet meme. Here it is. All right, this is very rude. I disavow. It's very sexist. I disavow. However, Rashid says 3 minutes into sex and boys be like, did you complete? And yeah, to the wrong house. Pass me my clothes, you weak D word, B word. And then Rajesh Meena, breaking the stereotype of thirsty Indian men, says, bruh, female completion isn't even necessary for reproduction. If God doesn't care about you, what makes you think I do? Which is savage. I do not avow this statement. Okay? It's not a good statement. It's very mean. It's very callous. It's very rude. It's a little funny.
Human beings experience partners. How's that weird? It just blows your position
No,
out.
it doesn't blow my position
You
up.
said there's no distinct thing that we could ever point to, right? And this is because when I asked you, hey, do you think that it's the case that if you have a virgin woman, right, versus a very promiscuous woman, they're equally as trustworthy? You said yes. However, you instantly blow your own position out the second you say that there is a comparative analysis which people are going to be making. That would erode the trust immediately.
Wait a second. So can I, just so I can understand your position, I want to just restate what you're saying back to you. Are you saying that because a woman who had more sex before marriage has more experience with what men she likes and what men she doesn't like, that therefore within the marriage, if she's unhappy with the state of the current marriage, she has things to compare it to, and thus she might be more likely to leave? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not just that, right? But it could be that if she had never experienced, and in fact, this is likely because women polled say this, if she had never experienced these other men and had no comparison, she would actually be much happier in the current relationship that she was in.
Well, that's just, okay, so ignorance is bliss is what
It's
you're
not
arguing?
ignorance.
Well,
right?
it is. She doesn't know about the other men.
It's a comparative. Well, then by your standards, should she just fuck a bunch of men so that she knows?
Not necessarily.
No.
Wait.
Which thing is more preferable for society then?
Wait, but you're making a false dichotomy.
What's the dichotomy?
You're making a false dichotomy.
I can't wait.
You are. You're saying that there's on one side that women do not have sex or before marriage whatsoever at all, and the other one is women just fuck people all the time, no matter what.
No, just promiscuity. I'm just asking. It would logically follow that if women had fucked two men, she now has a comparison.
Yeah.
Okay, so then
I think it's a good
we would
thing.
just say that every single time there's an additional. Well, okay, then if you think you think it's a good thing,
then you have to be better.
Then wait a second. Then if
you
you
have
think
to be
that's
better than the other guys.
No, let's back up. Then you think it's a good thing. You just said, I think that's a good thing. So that means if that's a good thing, why shouldn't they fuck a lot of men so that they have the largest comparison sample size possible?
I think it depends on the individual woman and what she wants. Some people don't want to have that much sex. Some people just don't.
That doesn't answer my question.
Wait.
If you think it's good that she had sex with one more person, right? Because now she has a comparative sample size. Why shouldn't she have sex with hundreds of different people to make sure she has the best comparative sample size?
To absurdity.
Oh, bro, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it's upsetting to you. But
it's not upsetting. Hold on. Do you think that eating broccoli is good?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we should just eat as much broccoli as fucking possible all the time?
But do I?
Did you think just eat an insane amount?
No.
So there can be a good thing, and that thing can be good up to a threshold.
Yeah, the thing is, though, is that if I were to say, right, eating lots of broccoli is good, so I have a comparison against other vegetables or something like this, right? And you rightly asked me then, well, shouldn't we eat like a ton of broccoli then so we have the highest comparison? We can also make that and say, well, but we cut it off at this before it gets to the point of like you're going to throw up or something like this, right? That's fair, but that would still equal a lot more men, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So then you think honestly that women probably ought to fuck a lot of men.
Not ought. No. Because I also think
then wouldn't they be missing out, bro?
No, I don't think they're missing out.
How do they really know what their preferences are, though, bro?
Because there's because there are different women who want different things. You're ascribing a monolith. Some women might want to be virgins until marriage because they value sex in a significant way.
Yeah, but how do they
other
really
women
know
don't.
unless they're having sex with multiple men?
You don't necessarily have to have sex with multiple men if you don't want that comparison.
Okay.
You don't have to, just because a comparison might be helpful in certain instances, doesn't mean that the negatives for that individual person might outweigh the positive benefits that they're having.
Perfect. So then is it the case then, right, that if we're just looking at the cost benefit analysis of comparison for outcome, if we are to have the best outcomes with women who've only had one sexual partner, because there's no comparative analysis.
Best outcomes. Can you just?
Yeah, this means they stay in their marriages longer and report happiness levels that are higher. which all virgins do almost universally.
Okay.
Almost. What did I say?
Overwhelming majority.
Overwhelming
Fine,
majority do.
Okay.
Same thing. And the reason I say universal is because it doesn't matter the nation. It doesn't matter the nation, at least in the Western nation, doesn't matter the nation when it comes to dissatisfaction. Now, you can look at some nations, perhaps in the Middle East, where they measure dissatisfaction, but you can't tell if it's because they're virgins or because they live in the Middle East, right? Like you can't tell. But in Western nations, you can tell. And here's how we know. We can do an analysis from the religious, right? The more religious they are, the less promiscuous they often are, and the more often they get married virgins, right? And here's what ends up happening. The non-religious, the secular women to get married virgins, and the religious women to get married virgins both report a much higher sexual satisfaction rate, much higher attraction rate, right? And they have much less in the way of the marriage splitting up because they make no comparative analysis.
I think making a weird comparative analysis is kind of strange because what it feels like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is I don't want my wife to have had sex with other men because I don't want her to compare the sex we're having to other men, which might make me feel insecure and make me feel that my sex
Let me
is
ask
not
you,
as
is
good.
that, do you honestly believe that that's a less tenable position than yours, which is I want my wife to have had sex with multiple men to compare other men to me?
Hold on, it is. Oh, no.
I'm just saying.
No, Andrew.
That is what you're saying,
no,
bro.
No, it's not.
Well, then why would you be against it?
Wait, I'm not, because women aren't a monolith, Andrew, and women don't all want the same thing.
So what? That's not what we're talking about.
Wait,
did I say women were a monolith or they all want the same thing? Or did I say that if you make a comparative analysis for outcome, that the outcomes tend to be a lot better for the virgin women because they don't make the comparative analysis?
I think it is strange to say people ought to have less experience so they don't know what they're missing out on.
I think
so they don't know what they're missing out on.
Yeah, this is sorry. I did get through. I did make Christian Valeris, Jonah Boy, and Grassroots. Just kidding. Much love. I did make Grassroots, Jonah Boy, and Christian Valeris, mods, obviously, because Grassroots is a homie and supports the channel amazingly, which I do appreciate. And then also Christian Valeris and Jonah Boy are almost daily viewers. I understand that they have other things to do some of the time, but they're here all the time. And there will be occasions where we do get like hate rated or attacked or whatever. I don't want you to be too aggressive with the ban hammer. I do want to be able to have spicy discussions with random people, but I think you guys see the way that I deal with folks. If they're just like spamming slurs or spamming insults, then they can obviously go. If they're actually dealing with, even if they're being abrasive or rude, but they're dealing with complex concepts, then I'm interested in talking with them. So yeah, we'll copy the Sitch and Adam thing where we have members of the community who are, they're sheriffs. There's a new sheriff in town. Be nice with Razzle Cherry, though. Be nice with Razzle Cherry just because he actually does engage in good faith. All right. So this conversation is not particularly nuanced, and I don't, Andrew's gotta act like, he just has his total own, but I think that Oliver is holding his own, which is good. And I do agree with Andrew more. However, marriage success rates for virgins. Studies indicate that women who marry as virgins have a higher chance of successful marriage compared to those with prior sexual partners. In fact, divorce rates for virgin marriages have declined over the decades from 11% to 6% in the 2000s. This suggests that virginity before marriage may be associated with greater marital stability. So they have lower divorce rates, decreasing divorce rates over time, possible explanations, and then what is it? Sexual partners versus divorce rate. Research indicates a link between the number of premarital partners and divorce rates, particularly for women. While some studies suggest a slight increase in divorce rates for women with 1 or 2 premarital partners, the highest rates of divorce are often associated with women having 10 or more partners. However, other studies suggest that individuals with a moderate number of premarital partners, 3 to 9, may have a lower divorce rate than those with only 1 or 2. And so this is where under 10 is probably ideal. And then 0 can be the strongest, but you kind of have to have like the religious motivations or the personal motivations in order to do that. So 0 is the best for staying with your partner forever. 3 to 9 is the second best. And then 10 plus is the worst. and 1 to 3 is in between the worst and the second best. So yeah, so I mean, this still is true. Andrew's poking at something that's true, but I also think that Oliver is asking for more nuance and realizing that different human beings are different, which is fine. But this is part of my gripe with liberalism, is because you don't judge any sets of behavior, you aren't able to make moral judgments about behavior at all. And so I think that if I asked Oliver, hey, do you think it's better to have more than 10 partners or less than 10 partners? He would say, I'm not going to. If I'm not a mod, this isn't a democracy. You're right, Vlad, it's not a democracy. And I do not trust you with mod. You're an aspiring authoritarian. Why would I give you mod? You're obviously going to use that in order to climb the halls of power and destroy your competitors. It's not a democracy. You're right. That's why I'm a Republican, bro. I don't trust the power of the mob. And what was I thinking? But I think Oliver wouldn't make a moral judgment for 10 plus body count, whereas he probably should. He probably should say that, yeah, it's bad. I don't want the state to do anything about it, but obviously having a low body count is better than a high body count. Jack Darko says, liberal or leftist, I feel like the libs are judgy enough. Well, Jack Darko, I'm sure some are and some aren't. But liberals, in my opinion, oftentimes progressives have a progressive view on sex, which means that they think that some things that I think are antisocial are actually good. And then I think that liberals oftentimes do not feel comfortable making any kind of moral judgments. And as a result, they'll just tolerate anything. So that's what I mean, liberal, like maximum liberty. Some liberals feel like they can't even make moral or cultural judgments. So mods, more like unelected priesthood. Yeah, I can feel the power already. I obviously have the power to ban, and that's been nice, but I've needed feudal lords for a while. So the fact that we now have Jonah Boy and Jonah Boy and Christian Valeris as feudal lords is dope. I'm going to grab a water. I'll be right back, but I'm going to let them play. That's sufficiently. He's too nuanced. He's not nuanced enough. Body count high is bad. What's CP talking about today, says Lou S. Well, number one, you missed out on all the membership. So that's number one, Lou. But number two, we're talking about sex and feminism and if being a promiscuous slut is bad. So it's okay. Let the memes flow. I'm gonna chair react and I'm gonna grab water. I'll be right back.
So then you're right. They don't know what so then you want your woman to have previously been fucked a bunch. So you wouldn't want her to be with you only because she didn't know what she was missing out on.
Yeah.
Right?
So
okay.
Wait a second.
All right,
Andrew, wait a second. Let me respond to this, Andrew.
Okay,
let me respond to this.
Bro.
It actually doesn't matter to me necessarily if she had sex before.
That's not what I asked you. I said, do you want your woman to have been previously fucked by other men so she doesn't know what she's missing out on? And you said, yeah.
Sure.
So here's the thing.
And here's why I did this to you. It's just not that important.
Here's why I did this to you.
It's just not that important to me.
Because you're a clip chimp. Like, what's your channel? And you're a clip chimp, right? You ain't never living that clip down.
Okay. I don't
never living that clip down.
I don't think there is a universal here. I don't think, for example, let me say this.
Universal?
Hold on.
I asked you.
Wait. I guess you would be holding all else equal, right? Are you holding all else equal? So someone who had a lot of sexual experiences,
don't run away
someone
from
who never. No, I am, because I think this is irrelevant. I think this is a relevant distinction, Andrew. If there is someone who had a lot of sex and they are identical in every other character trait and quality, and someone who didn't, that woman is probably going to know what she wants sexually, and that's great.
Okay.
Because then she knows what she likes, and that's good.
And you would prefer that kind of woman?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would.
Okay. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to promiscuity in society, then, right, women who have a lot of sex, they have a lot more experiences to really know what they want.
Certain women, yes. Hold on, because some women might not want that, Andrew.
But how would they know if they haven't done it? They don't have the experience.
I actually do think it's probably good for people to have sex before they get married, because then you get into a marriage and the sex is terrible, and then it can
Then
be
why are their
terrible.
satisfaction rates so high, bro?
There can be high satisfaction rates.
No,
for
there
certain
mostly
women.
is.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Correct. I'm not saying there's not, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that for individual people, I think it's probably best to have some experience. That doesn't mean that every single girl should have sex with as many men as she can.
Well, but you
Because
would admit that if a woman's had sex with 1,000 guys,
No.
that chick really probably knows exactly what she wants.
She probably knows what she wants,
Yeah.
but also
That's a lot of experience.
second.
You
You're
wouldn't want
correct.
to keep her away
You're
from that, right?
No, Andrew.
Let me ask you this. Would
No,
you have
but-
sex with a woman? Would you be with a woman, marry a woman who had sex with 2,000 men because she knows what she wants? Now she can compare you against 2,000 men.
I wouldn't want to marry someone who's a porn star because that's just not that's not aligned with my lifestyle. I want someone with the same interest and who's interested in the same career field as me.
What?
So I want to marry someone.
So if they
within
could be
that
a
same
porn
thing.
star and interested in your career
No,
field,
wait, no.
bro?
I would want them to be interested in that field and working in that field because I want someone who's comparable in that way because I don't want to.
Why do they have to work in the field you're in to be interested?
I think, but that's something that I value. I value someone who's interested in the same things I am and pursues that as a career.
So you would never marry a woman who's not in the same occupation.
Not
as you.
not exact occupation, but same domain of thing. For example, I wouldn't want to marry someone who's a grocery store clerk if I'm a lawyer. I don't want that power. I don't want that power differential. I want us to be
power
even.
differential.
I think so, a little bit. I don't want someone to be entirely dependent on me and my income.
Well, what do you mean a power differential? Do you think?
I think there can be in terms of income. If one person's making a lot more money than the other person, I think then there can be a power differential if someone gets into a relationship and doesn't have the ability to get out of that relationship because they're financially tied to that person. And I would never want someone to be financially tied to me.
I see.
That's what I'm saying.
I see. So men shouldn't get married.
That's not what I'm saying.
Sorry, they're repeating. So I'm going to engage with chat real quick. Asher Genesius says at Counterpoints. So when it comes to Destiny's Marriage, the stats say the game was rigged from the start. I mean, Philip Coffey, I think I saw him earlier today. He analogized because he's in a polyamorous relationship. He said that a polyamorous relationship is like playing Dark Souls for relationships. It's actually very difficult. And so, yeah, I think the lack of emotional maturity along with promiscuity probably did screw over Melina and Destiny in the long run. Polyamorous relationship statistics, long-term success. Now, I've had polyamorous people say that oftentimes the reason why they go into a polyamorous relationship isn't because they're looking for long-term success. While polyamorous relationships can be successful long-term, they also face unique challenges and potential pitfalls. Studies suggest that polyamorous relationships, including both primary and secondary partnerships, can last for several years, with some lasting even a decade or longer. However, research also indicates that open marriages, a specific type of polyamorous relationship, have a higher failure rate. So, yeah, I would say that open, meaning that you can date other people, is probably a risk. And then polyamorous, where you have a couple of long-term partners, it can work, but there's also, like it says, unique challenges and pitfalls. So yeah, even our resident polyamorous guy, Mr. Phillip, says it's actually super hard and probably not recommended for most people. So good for them, I guess. Good for them being in the Pacific Northwest and doing that. Sacred Snow says, Fox, if you click join, it'll show you the differences between the tiers. Yeah, I think I just did the basic tier for everyone. There isn't much of a difference as Connor doesn't do members only videos. Yeah. Effectively, you get instead of having a white name, you have a green name. So, Harmonic, thank you for the membership, by the way. We'll all get there together, okay? Well, Voided Parrot says Destiny's relationship failed because Melina didn't want their relationship to be open anymore. I don't know the internal dynamics of their relationship, but it did seem from the outside, based off of external perception. I don't have any specific insight into their relationship dynamic, but it did seem that Melina was able to go and have dates with other men, and Destiny didn't seem to care at all. And then it seemed like when Steven went on dates with other women, she seemed to care a lot. And so if there was a woman that she knew that she liked and that they hooked up with together, that's not really that big of a deal, or that didn't seem to affect their relationship a lot. But if there was a woman that Steven was seeing separately and it was more than just a hookup, if it was a hookup, I don't think we ever heard anything about that when it came to them fighting on stream. But if it was more than a hookup, it seemed like there were some jealousy issues that led to long-term emotional burnout. Why not call it polygamous? Because I think the difference is polygamous, if I remember, is related to marriage, because monogamy, right? Monogamy has to do, or bigamy. What's bigamy? I forget what bigamy is. The act of going through a marriage ceremony while already married to another person. And then polygamy versus polyamory. I think polyamory just means you're dating. I think polygamy means you're married. The practice or custom of having more than one wife or husband at the same time. Yeah, polygamy is marriage. Polyamory, you don't have to be married. There you go. And then Philip, just giving you a heads up, Vlad is not going to approve of your relationship style. All right. Let's continue with the content, but let's just say that too nuanced, insufficiently nuanced. It's like porridge, you know, whatever that children's fable about stealing the bear's porridge and sleeping in their bed, Goldilocks. That's what's going on.
I think men should marry women who are on their level.
No.
I think men should marry women who are on their level.
I don't think you realize what you just said.
No.
The divorce initiators, you would agree, are mostly women, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Do you think that when women initiate these divorces that they just like do it out of pocket, or do you think there was a big buildup? They thought about it for a long time.
I would venture to say the second, but I'm sure you're going to say it's not.
No. It is, right?
Okay.
They think about it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
However, if they're the ones who are springing the divorce on the husband, right? Mm-hmm. He hasn't thought about the divorce for a long time, has he?
I don't think that's necessarily the case. It could be.
It is the case.
Wait a second. Is there data to show that men who get men get blindsided by the divorce?
And here's what the data shows, right? The women initiate it and the men don't want it. They don't want the divorce. Okay. Women want the divorce, right? Yeah, not the men. So they've been thinking about the divorce for a while, right? So the thing is that if they can just go and get divorced whenever it is that they want, they can just literally go and file paperwork, right? And the man's not prepared for it. They have like an exit strategy. They're prepared. They've been thinking about it for a long time. Man, not right. Man, hang on. Man hasn't.
So men married the wrong woman.
So men would be. Hang on, bro. So the financial dependency aspect here, right? The man is also financially dependent that his wife's not going to divorce him, right?
I think that.
Right. Hang on. Right. Hold on. Answer my fucking question and then respond to it.
I don't understand your question. Are they partially financially dependent?
Every married couple's dependent on it.
Yeah.
Yes, every one of them. So if she blindsides him with a divorce, right, then what happens here is when you make the case, financial dependency, there's financial dependency and that leads to like power dynamics, then that would mean women actually have the power dynamic interest here, because if they can initiate divorce whenever they want and devastate a man financially,
so can women.
But men aren't.
Okay, but they can't.
But they descriptively aren't.
Then why aren't they?
Because they want to stay married. Okay. They don't think, they're not looking for an exit strategy. Women are plotting an exit strategy. So men get blindsided with this, bro.
I think that women who blindside someone with a divorce, and it's not a conversation of, I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy. You're not, meeting X, Y, or Z needs. I feel like you're not communicating with me. Maybe there's infidelity involved. Yeah. Then I think that if she doesn't talk about any of that, and then just suddenly
she can talk about all of that, but it's still blind. Here's the thing. Here's the problem with this, right? Is like you seem to want to take human nature out of the human aspect here. If you know that you're going to leave your significant other, right? Are you going to like try to leverage it so that they have the best chance for custody and they have the best chance for financial security? Or are you going to leverage things the best possible way for yourself?
No, actually the first one. And that's what my dad did in the divorce from my stepmom.
Your dad, yes.
I think it was a really
rational, reasonable man. Yes.
I think it was a very good thing of him to do. He didn't leave my stepmom completely
that was awful good of him. But do you agree with me that within human nature, if you know that you're going to exit, you know that you're leaving, right? Just like with a job, aren't you going to try to make
job is different.
Aren't you going to try to make the best conditionals possible for the exit so that you're as financially set as possible?
Putting in your 2 weeks is not the same thing as signing.
No, it's not putting in 2 weeks. Here's what you do when you change a job. You don't put in.
So again, no nuance, too much nuance. And what's even the argument at this point? Is that women initiate divorce and that they have disproportionate advantages in divorce proceedings, and oftentimes men don't want to get divorced? I understand that. And I think somebody in chat has an oversimplification. Who is it? Jack Danko says, lol, men don't want divorce. They want a free bang maid with minimal emotional attachment. So this is an oversimplification, but I think it points to something that's very real, which is effectively that men, I was very similar in this regard. I think particularly because of the Marine Corps, but men in general, I think, are raised with two acceptable emotions that are enforced socially on a subconscious level. You're allowed to be two things. You're allowed to be angry and you're allowed to be numb. Those are the two things that men are allowed to be. And so if you're nurturing, kind, funny, weird, goofy, you can be those things, but you have to have the confidence to do those things. When you're being goofy, weird, funny, nurturing, mentoring, all that kind of stuff, there's going to be some people out there who are going to give you flack. And those are going to be other men who are going to be policing your behavior, where they're like, why aren't you either being angry or emotionally numb? That is the way that men conduct themselves. And so what you have to do, which I think is substantively better, and this is more of a liberal progressive perspective, is you have to give yourself permission to experience more emotions than anger and numbness. And that's something that the Greeks actually talked about allegedly, is that they thought a man who was incapable of crying or incapable of experiencing other emotions besides like anger and stoicism, they thought that person was legitimately emotionally stunted. Okay. I hope Commander Haircut appreciates me using a non-ableist slur compared to the R slur, but emotionally stunted. And so I love anger. I love numbness. But in order to be a better husband to my wife, I had to learn to be funny and goofy and weird and confident and play with my kids and be nurturing and mentoring. And that's how I became a better partner. Whereas I think in the early parts of our relationship, particularly when I was in law enforcement, I was just angry and I was just numb. And so as a result, we had a pretty rough patch early in our marriage because I was gone all the time. I was working all the time. When I was around, I was grumpy and I was angry and I was numb. And that's not a whole life. Like you don't want to be, a woman doesn't want to love a man who's angry and numb all the time. That's not enough for a woman to sustain herself emotionally. So, for guys, I know it's hard. Men, sometimes it's super hard, especially if your culture around you is just saying, no, stay in the box, stay in the box, stay in the box. You can only be angry. You can only be numb. Those are the only two emotions that you're allowed to express out loud. It can be tough to break out of it, but I think that you need to have the confidence to be like, no, I was a kid once. I used to be funny. I used to have fun. I used to be crazy. I used to be weird. I used to make jokes. And you just need to reconnect with your inner child and have some fun. Ray Sunlight says, men don't want divorce because it costs. Been one, except I don't blame her for calling it quits on a 13-year marriage that I was just going through the motions. Today, we are both happier. Well, Ray Sunlight, and what I would argue, not necessarily to you, because you got to live your life the way that you need to live it, but there was probably a chapter in your life during that relationship where you were angry and numb and you weren't communicating and this, that, the other. And if you guys had communicated, if you had located a more complex emotional stack, then maybe you could have rekindled your relationship. Maybe you weren't interested in that. Maybe she wasn't interested in that, but it's entirely possible to like revivify and re-enrich your relationship. Numb is safe, not numb is scary. That's true. Having real feelings is terrifying because if you have real feelings, then those can be hurt. When you're angry, you can't be hurt. When you're numb, you can't be hurt. But actually, like loving someone like your children, if your children get hurt, it's gonna hurt, Nick Smack says, it's insecurity in expressing yourself, which people fool themselves, project security. True. Ray Sunlight says, second point, nobody wants a prisoner in a marriage. If you don't want to be there, go. It's more about being honest with yourself and your partner. Communication is huge. Harstar says, what emotion do you feel when you get protective of your family? Like rage, blind rage, pride, like righteous rage. That's what I feel when I get protective. Righteous fury. Harmonic says, I'm going to be uber progressive on this one. What you're saying is true, but on the other side of the coin, women aren't socially allowed to express things like anger and frustration. I don't know if that's true. Like, my argument from the wife, because she would say that's 100% true, is that when she's expressing anger and frustration, I am constantly trying to corral her into solution-based thinking, because I think that's how men deal with anger and frustration, is they say, okay, well, how do we fix this? So there's like a miscommunication between the genders in that regard. But I think women articulate their frustration and anger all the time. But I think men want those emotions to be productive, and women don't always want to channel their emotions into productivity. Sometimes they just want to feel something. Grassroots says, I can talk for myself, but I was funny and relatively numb. And when I had my hard nose, it was kind of tough. But I always, even after we broke up, was extremely honest about what emotions I felt. Good. Yeah. Yeah, women can get very angry, especially when I hit them with my red pill, Riz. Nice. All right, let's let them dig a little bit more.
In your 2 weeks.
Whatever, you quit.
You've
I don't
already
care.
arranged a job
Okay,
for
fine.
6 fucking months before you
still-
ever put in your 2
still-
weeks.
It's still not the same, because you don't have
it's not.
you don't have obligations to that individual who you're working for in terms
Why
of
don't
emotional
you? Yes,
security.
of course you have
Wait,
obligations to them.
You can quit a job.
Yeah,
It's
I
fine
know,
to
but
quit a
you still
job.
made you can quit a marriage, but you still made a fucking agreement like you did with your job.
Sure, and I think people in marriages have a responsibility to care for the other person.
They have a duty?
In a way,
They have a
in way-
duty?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think everyone has a duty. I just don't think the duties are gender specific.
Oh, they're not.
No, I don't think they are.
They're not. Okay.
No.
So let's I guess we can dive into that next. This is fucking hilarious.
Mhm.
So let's dive into the idea of gender itself. Okay.
Okay.
How many would you say there are? An infinite number?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I have no clue.
You have no clue how many there are?
No. How many
Okay.
names are there in the world, Andrew?
Do you consider every name a gender?
No, but I think they're a relevant category of identification. So, yeah,
Well, okay.
they're the same relevant category. Of
Do you
identification.
understand like a label versus a descriptor?
So Harmonic says, I've noticed a lot of people call other women the B words for being angry, mad, frustrated. Sure, but Harmonic Fox, this is one of my frustrations when arguing with women, is I call men all sorts of bad words all the time. So with women, I might use a gendered insult. Not that I'm endorsing this, but I might use the B word or the C slur or something like that. But with men, I'm calling them dicks. I'm using the R slur. I'm calling them the B word. I'm calling a-holes. If they're friends, I might use the F slur. If they're particularly nefarious enemies, I might use the F slur. But the point is that, like, those slurs or whatever are part of the masculine dynamic, where if somebody is being rude, abrasive, terrible to you or people around you, then you say really cruel, mean stuff to them. And that's accepted. That's an accepted part of like the masculine dynamic. So women saying like, oh, but when we're aggressive, people call us bad words. And it's like, yeah, but when men are bad, I call them bad words as well. That's not a gendered thing. Jabberwocky 98 says, hello, Connor. Good early afternoon. Well, good early afternoon right back to you. At least 4 genders, maybe like 7, maybe 7,000. Ray Sunlight says, yes, I fell to the numb trap and she was way too young at the time, needed to spread her wings. We tried for the kids and that was a mistake. Life now for all parties has been so much better thereafter. Good. DeFeels, Connor's never called me the F slur. Well, meet up with me for a beer and, I'll call you a friendly F slur. Stay away from women, cough, cough, Latinas that throw things at your head. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is we accept it differently across culture. And we think it's funny when different cultures behave differently. As an example, most people will accept the fact that Hispanic females will take over a disproportionate amount of household labor, will take care of the kids de facto, but there's also a very strong chance of like physical abuse. Like it's a stereotype. I don't know how much it's backed up by reality, but basically every single person that I know who's like dated a Mexican woman or married a Mexican woman, they were like, yeah, they're great in the relationship. They're great in the bed. They're great at cooking. They're great at cleaning. But basically, if you step on their wrong side, they're going to hit you with a frying pan. So, yeah. Note that you were only capable of saying the male one there. No, mixed snacks, don't mistake this. I am comfortable saying all of the slurs. It's the channel that my channel is my channel, but I'm related with Valor Media, and I don't want to use these slurs and then have people be like, I thought Valor Media was all about positive masculinity, and here's this toxic bro reviewing red pill content, but he's using all the naughty words that the red pill bros use. Like, I don't want that. And Commander Haircut, parasocial love to you and yours, but you actually did do that. I used naughty words, and you were like, he's not allowed to do that. We hung out at canvassing. Oh, okay. Well, next time we hang out at canvassing, say, hey, I want you to call me the F slur, and then I'll call you the F slur, and then you can hit me. Then we can get a beer. Then we can laugh about it. Jabberwocky says, I've had this conversation with my friends, but I'm pretty sure there aren't any male-specific slurs, like how B is female-specific. I think the F slur, the anti-homosexual F slur, is gendered male, and I think it's a particularly strong insult for males. And Oliver and the Twist says, you should only trust your naked body to someone who also loves your naked soul. Charlie Chaplin to his daughter. That's true. Play 40K and don't be a simp. It's easy. Agreed. Lesbian wives or Latinas. Do we want to look this up real quick? We're kind of memeing a little bit, but domestic violence, Hispanic household statistics. Hispanic households statistics. Approximately 1 out of every 4 Hispanic households experience assaults between the married or cohabitating partners. So it's 25%. Caucasian domestic violence statistics. Generally research the people of color experience domestic violence. Here's a detailed. It just says POC experience higher rates, but I'm not going to dig into the data. Lesbian domestic violence rate. Okay. Lesbian women experience domestic violence at a rate comparable to or higher than heterosexual women. Studies have found that 44% of lesbian women and 61% of bisexual women have experienced bad stuff, slightly less bad stuff, slightly in stalking, compared to 35% of homosexual women. So lesbians are about 8% higher than heterosexuals, and then they're about almost half. Heterosexuals are almost half of what bisexual women experience. That's not cool. Not cool. Not saying you implied that. Okay. 44% of women in lesbian relationships experience domestic abuse, according to the CDC, says Jack Darko. That's interesting. Oliver in the Twist says, however, I'm 30. If a woman had a body count of 10 to 20, that's roughly 1 to 2 partners a year. I don't find this person to be a whore. You're like 40 to 50 plus, then I start looking sideways, in my opinion. Yeah. All right. Christian Blair says, at Counterpoints, about F slur, just don't do it around Pisco lol. He already had a stick up his butt. No need to add to it. Sure. Cuck son or furry daughter. True. Okay. All right. We're having too much fun with slurs. Let's get back into the content.
Sure, but I think I think there's a lot of overlap between the two.
No, there's not really a lot of overlap between the two. One, an empty label is, my name is Andrew. Do you agree with me? My name is Andrew?
Sure.
Okay. Do you agree with me that there could be many Andrews sitting at the table with me right now?
Sure.
So Andrew doesn't describe anything about me. It's a label, right?
There are certain connotations with it. For example, I would assume that you're a man. I would assume that that's largely an American
Andrew
name.
doesn't determine that.
But it's associated with it.
No, it's not even associated with it. So let's take something like...
Yes, it is. What are you doing?
Not
Andy. Take something like Andy then.
Yeah, then we wouldn't know.
Okay, so it's just an empty label, right?
Empty is weird. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's just an empty...
For the sake of conversation, we can move it forward, but Andrew insisting that Andrew doesn't have connotations of a man, I think is silly.
Label. Mm-hmm. So, but if I were to say man or male, that is a descriptor which is trying to point at something specific. It's not an empty label, yeah?
Yeah.
So what is a man and what is a woman? Start with what a woman is.
Sure. So I think largely, and I claim this was my debate with Jim Bob, and I'll claim it with you. I'm not super well versed in like gender ideology or things of that nature. So I don't have comprehensive definitions or sets of necessary and sufficient conditions that must be met in order for someone to be in one category. So if we're talking about, for example, woman and man, there are biological definitions of this thing. If you look in the dictionary, this is the reason why there's multiple definitions.
So what's a woman, dude?
Okay, so I think a biological definition could be something like an adult human female.
Okay.
But I do think there can be social definitions of woman, of someone who has a desire to be in accordance with a particular set of social and cultural norms that are typically associated with the female sex.
Okay, so if a person did not have those norms but identified themselves as a woman, would you call them that?
So what did I just say
Answer
before?
my question.
No, but what did I say before?
You
You're
said,
asking a question that shows that you didn't listen to what I said before.
Okay. In fact, I'll steelman it just to
Okay.
make sure that I got it correct.
Mhm.
You think that there are scientific definitions which we can associate to male and female. You
Correct.
gave an example. The example for female was adult human, or I'm sorry, for woman, adult human female from the scientific end. You
Mhm.
agree with that portion so far?
Yeah, but that's,
Okay,
you did miss something
Hang
at the
on.
beginning.
Then
but
when we go into gender, you
Mhm.
say what gender is it's a series of traits and cultural and social, like social norms in which we would attribute to somebody, which would then make them either woman or man.
So first, you missed the first part that I said,
Okay.
which I said that I don't think there is a comprehensive set of necessary and sufficient conditions that can be given for man or woman. There's going to be things that lie outside of there, and it's really
Actually,
hard
that's
to
perfect.
define.
Can we stop
Really
that?
hard to
Can we
define.
stop right there?
Okay.
Since you're confused as to how many necessary conditions there would be, then it would be just a descriptor or a self ID, right?
No, not necessarily.
Then what else would it be?
I think, I'm not sure. I think.
You're not sure?
No, but Andrew,
You're not sure, bro? What else would it be besides a self ID then?
Self ID, other people recognizing it. If people don't
But
recognize
other people
you,
are
it's
recognizing
fine.
it based on the scientific definition.
Some people aren't.
They
Some people-
conflate it with the scientific
Some
definition.
people are also with social, though. Some people definitely do. Do you
would
know someone's
call a
chromosomes when they walk down the
Would you
street?
call Brian, if Brian looked exactly like he looks right this second, but said that he's a woman, right?
And you wanted to use she, her pronouns? I don't really give a shit.
Yeah, you would agree that he is then.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Okay, so then a woman would have to.
So you guys are still on the slur train, so I have to check that out because Andrew's being a little pedantic, but that's okay. The Silverjack Man says, if my girlfriend called me the F slur, I'd retort something along the lines of, yeah, because it's not fun to hook up with you, fatty. Zing! Dude, if you do that and she hits you, I'm taking her side. That is a crazy pants thing to say. And then all I was going to say is, my wife is quite can be verbally abrasive. So we use slurs and cuss words in our communications all the time, but we typically are sparring and having fun. Sometimes it's angry, sometimes it's fun.
What are you talking about?
Using the F slur.
I don't do that. I'm a lady.
Yeah, okay. My wife says she doesn't do that. She's a lady, and she wants you to know that she's a lady and doesn't use that kind of language. Never.
How dare you?
And then she mouthed it to me as she was walking away. Peter Pan Lapal says, are they debating if gender exists at all or just about the definition? Well, the whole point of this was supposed to be feminism and whether or not feminism is good or bad, but Andrew has taken on a series of debate tactics in order to try to isolate Mr. Oliver's arguments. And so far we've gone over like whether or not virgins have higher degrees of happiness than promiscuous people. We've gone over whether or not we can even prescribe social norms. We've gone over whether or not there's actual harm caused by incestuous homosexual twins. We've been all over the place. So we haven't really landed on what is feminism and whether or not feminism is good or bad. We're kind of having, I think Andrew likes to have a lot of definitional debates because he can drag people into like nuances of words and then try to beat them with the nuances of words. Yeah. Lol, I love how she was right there to defend herself. Yeah, man. She's a tough lady. She doesn't take no guff. So anyways, that's where we're at. Let's let them cook a little bit more.
Be anybody who identifies as a woman.
Well, no, because that would be a circular definition. And I'm
So
not-
then tell me what it is then. If
So
you agree
I
that
don't
Brian can be a woman right
I
now
don't-
by
I don't-
saying he is,
I think he can be a woman in the social sense of it, but I don't think he can be a woman
how
in
can
the
he
sense
be a
of the
woman in the
biological.
social sense of it?
Because there's not a set of necessary and sufficient conditions.
Then it
that
would just
can
be
given.
self-ID.
Just because there's ambiguity around boundaries doesn't mean the categories don't exist.
Oh, no,
So I
hang
think-
on. I agree, unless we have a category to point to, which we do. So we have a category, man, woman, woman, which
Sure.
points to male female.
Okay.
Right. So those categories do exist. When we're talking about ambiguity here, you're creating the ambiguity by just failing to admit that you just believe it's a self ID.
I don't necessarily think it is a
Then
self-idea.
tell me what it is.
I think it's a combination of someone identifying as and them being recognized by other people in the society. So if Brian said he was a woman right now, full honesty right now, I don't really think I would think he was a woman.
You would think he was.
No, I wouldn't think he was.
You
a woman.
wouldn't think he
Because
was.
I think most people wouldn't recognize him as such. And I do think that if most people in a
Okay.
society don't recognize someone as a woman, even if they identify as a woman, then for a lot of functional purposes, they aren't treated as a woman and they aren't. So even if their self-ID is that way, it's not going to match up to the treatment that they're going to
I
have.
see. So you wouldn't believe Brian if he said he was a woman.
Right now, no, probably not.
Probably not.
I might use she, her pronouns if Brian wanted to use that information.
Would you
Wanted
treat
that.
Brian like a woman?
I don't think there is a proper way to treat a man or treat a woman. So I would treat Brian like a human being the same way I
Okay.
would treat men and treat women.
Okay. So, but you would use his pronouns.
Sure.
Okay. And you would use those pronouns as a matter of respect that
Yeah.
he said he's a woman.
Well, yeah, I just don't want to be an asshole. Like I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
That's just being
I like how Brian's in the background, just kind of like awkwardly sitting and kind of just be like, That's kind of dope. That's kind of dope how he's forcing the argument. Brian's being awkward, and this guy's being what I would say is relatively socially normal in liberal and progressive spaces. Which is, if somebody with a beard, like if I was to tell you guys, I'm a woman, that's not. I don't have secondary sexual characteristics. I don't have boobs. I have a full beard. I work out. I have a masculine body shape. You know, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty clear that my presentation, they call it gender presentation, my gender presentation is in line with a man. So I appreciate Oliver being willing to say that Brian's gender presentation is obviously a male or a man, and therefore he wouldn't instantaneously believe that he was a woman. So yeah, Bud123, Connor is one strong woman. It's true. Yeah. Commander Haircut, I joined right on I'm a woman. Well, hey, I skipped using an ableist slur earlier, so you should be proud of me. Guys, while we're here, there's something I need you to discuss. Yes, exactly. But Oliver is breaking with progressive orthodoxy, and I appreciate him doing that.
being a jerk.
I think intentionally misgendering someone, like I don't. I just because it's kind of.
I'm really just not really kind of satisfied here. I'm sorry. I want to be so that we can move into the proper gender roles for society. But if we can't really nail down what a woman is, I'm not sure how we're supposed to nail down how men and women are supposed to function with each other in intersexual dynamics, or how they're supposed to interact with each other in social dynamics. I'm not really sure that we can even get to that part unless we nail down what even a man and a woman is.
So, I mean, we've nailed it down largely biologically, but I think
we haven't.
but I
Well,
think-
we haven't nailed down what your definition of these things
So,
are.
I don't see. Here's the thing: is you're going to rigidly categorize men and women into.
Yeah, so Oliver's actually, I think, doing quite well, where he said, well, we have a biological definition, which is adult human female. Boom, done. Okay, we have a biological definition. But what he's saying is that there's a social definition as well, which is the expression of a woman, because you can have trans women who act like a woman. So with Blair White, just as an example, she's a passoid. Hold on. I'm going to pull up a couple of examples just for the few conservatives who can stand to look at trans women. But Blair White has had sufficient cosmetic surgery and has been acting socially as a woman for so long that most people treat her as a woman, right? I think she actually looked better with a little bit of weight on her. But she's been a woman for a long time. Okay, she's acted like a woman. She's been treated like a woman. Most people treat Blair White as a woman, even though she was born male. Then also, if there isn't any inappropriate pictures, I'm going to pull up Taftaj. I'm not going to scroll too far because I think it can get a little spicy. She does do spicy stuff. I don't know if she still does spicy stuff, but Taftaj is treated like a woman because she's a passoid. So she's also treated like a woman, even in distant right-wing spaces, because she likes dissident right-wing politics and philosophy, so she's treated like a woman. So the whole point, I could bring up like Elijah Schaefer, but I think you guys get the point, is that Oliver is saying that we are going to treat trans women as women socially. Yeah, ever since I stopped liking Vaush as much, I've been saying Vaush. I've noticed that because Vaush was used kind of as like a derogatory way to pronounce his name because everybody who likes him pronounces it Vaush. And I noticed that I started saying Vaush, right? Kind of weird. Anyways, but Blair, Toftaj, yeah, even Brianna Wu, they're going to get treated like women because they socially act like women. And so Oliver is leaving that category open, whereas Andrew is not. And I don't think there's any conflict there. Andrew's acting like there's a conflict. I don't think there is.
Male and female, and then say that certain gender roles follow from that.
They do.
I'm basically saying that I don't think those gender roles
that's
follow.
great, but you won't nail down what a man and a woman even is.
Because I don't think you can give a comprehensive.
Well, then how can you make social prescriptions for what they ought to ought not do?
What's a chair?
What's a
chair?
This is interesting, right?
What is a chair?
Ooh. Hold up. Wait a minute. What Oliver is going to argue, which I like a lot, is that just because a definition is fuzzy doesn't mean the thing doesn't exist, right? So if we describe a chair, it's something with 4 legs that humans sit on. But if you describe a horse, that is also something with 4 legs that you can sit on. If you, I'm trying to think of like another equivalent, but there's a whole bunch of things that can be chairs that aren't chairs because we understand chairs, like socially, within a social context. Yeah, 3-legged chair, exactly, R-star, exactly. So what Oliver is making an argument, and if you're smart enough to follow it, then you guys are all brilliant. You all have 3,000 IQ. You're all brilliant. You have pristine taste in content, and you're wildly intelligent human beings, right? Beanbag chair, exactly. So just because a definition can be fuzzy doesn't mean we don't understand that thing. And he said that almost immediately. I know it's a talking point that's used in other debates, but at the same time, the fact that he landed on something where Andrew was trying to rhetorically back him into a corner and then he just hit him with the fuzzy definition, I think that's actually brilliant. It's like, what's the definition of a man? It's like a featherless biped. Right? The featherless biped meme. This is like a Socrates. Oliver. Oliver and Andrew are replicating like a 3,000-year-old debate. So you can't just define man as featherless bipeds. I mean, look at this chicken I just plucked. Does this featherless biped look like a man to you? Think, Plato, think. This was the time that Plato got owned in the marketplace of ideas. The raccoon, featherless biped. Featherless biped. Sorry, I'm enjoying this way too much, but I do think this is funny as hell. That just because a definition is oh, that's dope. I hope that, I think when we die, I don't know what happens. I don't know if we're in like a dreamscape. I don't know if we're in mindless oblivion. I have no idea what happens when we die, right? But I hope that if there is an ability to appreciate the living by the dead, then I hope that Diogenes and Plato can appreciate the fact that people are having the featherless biped debate like 3,000 years later. I think that's hilarious. Sorry. Sacred Snow says, I hate the passing equals accepting trans identity because sometimes women have some male physical traits, usually in the face. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. And by the way, I'm not saying that being a passoid grants you the status of a woman. I'm trying to say that passoids, even conservatives, socially treat passoids as women. So even conservatives understand this. They just pretend that they don't. What was the other thing? Walmartian. So there are Walmartians who are human beings who have very strange physiological shapes or outfits or whatever, and they're just lunatics. and they're going to have very strange physical characteristics that sometimes are not going to line up with the male-female divide or the, like right here. I don't know if this person is a man or a woman, right? I wouldn't be surprised either way. But this person, that's a man in a dress. Where's that picture? Anyways, you get the point. But the main point is, this could be a man. This could be assigned male at birth. And I think that there's some characteristics of this person being assigned male at birth. But I also think that it's entirely possible that this person could be assigned female at birth. And I really would not know until they open their mouth. And if they opened their mouth and they sounded femme and they were like, oh yeah, I was born as a woman. I just, I have a very strong jaw. Then I'd be like, oh, okay, nice to meet you. And then if they were like, no, I was born a man. And even though I live in, like a very rural area, I still wanted to, socially adapt to being a trans woman. I'd be like, oh yeah, cool. Nice to meet you. So, bro, look at this butt crack. People are crazy, dude. People are crazy. So yeah, there's exceptions to the rule, I guess is what I'm saying. Razzle says, I think your friend Brianna Wu's takes on this stuff are pretty spot on. Trans women aren't quite women. They're a trans woman, and that's okay. Some can live as women fully with luck and work, and they deserve basic dignity and civil rights. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. You guys are still talking about chairs. Sacred Snow says counterpoints. Like the right will meme about the left doesn't know what a woman is, but we have a Main Khalif trans boxer or the Olympic runner who was DQ'd for having too much testosterone a while ago. Yeah, and by the way, I think both of those people have ovaries and were assigned female at birth. So yeah. So you would probably think dwarfs are kids then? No, because obviously children have an age component. So just because a dwarf or a little person acts out the role of a child doesn't mean that they're fully a child, right? Or a child at all, I guess. Although that is funny, Vlad the Kebabber, I do think that there is something funny about like trans racialism. And I do think there's something funny about trans ageism, where you could take like 70% of the trans arguments and then argue them for trans ageism and trans racism or trans racialism. And effectively, if you accept them for trans people, then we should accept Rachel Dolezal as well. I think that's one of the things that's actually really funny because everybody rejects Rachel Dolezal. So if y'all don't remember, at the peak of the woke hysteria, this woman, who I think was a part of the ACLU, she was born blonde, white, freckled, but she just got a tan and she styled her hair similar to a black woman. And she worked for the ACLU and was accepted as a black woman for years and became kind of like a civil rights campaigner. These are her parents, bro. These are her parents. And so if you accept some trans arguments, then you might need to accept some transracial arguments. I think that's bad funny. Anyways, the world's a wild place. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to do about any of this stuff, bro. I'm just here for the ride, okay? Somebody got that Marge Simpson. Christian Valera says, speaking of dwarves, have you heard of a movie called Tiptoes with Matthew McConaughey? Watch the trailer for some kicks. I'll do that later because I don't want to get copyright struck, but that does sound funny. Yeah, but listen, man. Listen. You know what I'm you know what I'm poking at. You know what I'm poking at. Let's continue.
For what they ought to ought not
Andrew,
do.
what's a chair?
What's
a chair?
This is interesting, right?
What is a chair?
A chair, just like sports team, you could use that same analogy. This is one of the it's the same thing. Okay. I'm explaining it, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll answer the question. I'll give you the descriptor of what a chair is. Okay. Right? My proprietary definition.
John says, how's your day been, Connor? It's been excellent. We've been chilling with chat. We've been having a good time. We've been watching some good content. You know, we're creeping up to 70 right now that we've been live for a bit. And then not just that, But Grassroots Hegemon was incredibly kind today and donated a bunch of memberships. And so he did a crazy donation earlier today, and it's very much appreciated. So I'm actually having an excellent day. Also, I do want to, Grassroots Hegemon obviously did a lot of really cool things, but Christian Vlaris became a member. Harmonic Fox became a member. K-Soko became a member. AD gave us $20. Pondering Politics gave us $10. And Sapient Green gave us 100 DKK. So I do want to thank all of our financial and social supporters. It's been a beautiful day.
Of a chair is that it's a thing you sit on that has like 4 standing legs and a cushion and things like this, right?
They have a beanbag chair.
But yeah. But here's what's interesting, right, about this. I'm trying to point to something. Correct. Just like with sports teams. If I say there's a sports team, right, or a sports fan, sorry,
yes.
Sports fan. You could say, what is a sports fan, right? Is it just an empty label? No, it's really not. You would assume that there's things that come with it. Like,
hang on, empty labels.
Hang on. Like, you would assume for a second that they support the team, they support this, they support that, right? When I give a definition of a chair, while it is true that there can be a very comprehensive, descriptive definition of a chair, I'm actually not wrong about my definition of chair. And You're not wrong about your definition of chair either when you say beanbag chair, right? Because we're still trying to point to the same idea of what a chair is. In this case, we're not pointing to the same idea of what a woman or a man is.
Sure, I don't necessarily think so. And I think that the social definition, there are a lot of people who ascribe to that. And when people
John says, wait, Pondering Politics, the 500K channel? Yeah, Pondering and I used to debate and used to go on to live stream panels together probably 2 years ago. We used to have debates in the DGG and panel orbit. Like, he streamed for a while, and kind of the same way that I did, where I was part-time, and he streamed like that for like a year or two. But then what he decided to do, which I think is brilliant, by the way, is Josiah just started posting 3 10-minute videos a day, similar to Luke Beasley, similar to some of the Midas Touch Bros. And I do wonder if I should do that style of content as well, just because, I was expecting to go live and then everybody was going to be like, Connor, you're the greatest live streamer who's ever lived. Here's 5,000 people to watch you live every single day. That's what I thought was going to happen. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. We're working on it. But Josiah just does 3 post-recorded videos a day, maybe 5, and they're all like 10 minutes, and they're all on current events. And as a result of that, he went from, I don't know, he went from effectively like, 100,000 views per month, that he went to like 10 million views per month, and he's making crazy stupid money. Now, I happen to enjoy this format a little bit more, so I'm going to keep streaming probably for the next 4 or 5 months. But if we hit like the 4 or 5 month mark, and no offense to you guys, but if we're streaming to like, I don't know, still 60, 70 people, then maybe I'll still stream, but I'll decrease the amount that I stream, and then I'll start doing the 3 a day videos. Right. And so, yeah. And that's where I would doing. Connor was bigger than Pondering for a long time. Yeah, I was, but he found the right formula. He cracked the algorithm, and he took off like a bat out of hell. Just having an alt ego resist lib version of you making similar videos. Well, that would be why I'm less interested in the content, is because he effectively, and I'm not dogging on him at all, he's a great guy. I would consider him a friend, especially if he said that we were friends. But he effectively, if you watch his videos, it's, what do the Democrats think about this issue? That's kind of his content. So it's like, if you want to hear the Democratic Party / a general Democratic supporter, what they think about a current event, he's going to give it to you every single time. And so I feel like there's a lack of flexibility within that, where I'm sure that he expresses his opinion, some of the time, but he's not really like going hard on, this is something that's intractably incorrect about the Democrats. I don't think he's going to do a 10-minute video on that. He might say that on a stream, but 90% of his viewership is coming from post-recorded views. Grassroots says he was a 100K sub YouTuber and rocketed up to 500K before the election. Yep. Connor's channel is bigger than Andrew's sexual confidence. True. Are you a leftist? No. Jack Dorco says, have you tried doing the duo vertical stream to YouTube? I've heard a good thing about being able to wind up the shorts feed. Not yet. Shorts on popular political topics is algorithmically banging right now. Yeah, but shorts don't pay that much. Sacred Snow says at Counterpoints, now we have to wait for Trump to go away so we can ride the normie conservative wave to popularity, right? Hopefully. But how do I phrase this? So I've done a couple of shorts that were really successful. I have a short with a Star Wars Emperor class battleship crashing into the USS Enterprise. Is it USSS? I forget. But the Federation class starship, the Enterprise. And I have that as like a 1 minute short, and that's got like 300,000 views. I made $40. I have a 3.5 million view video of me shooting my bolter that still gets comments and views all the time. And it's partially monetized because it's gun content, but because of the partial modification, I get like, I've made like $60 off of 3.5 million views. So I'm not really interested in just cutting shorts. I think it's not lucrative enough. If you aren't a leftist, why do you like that the American government kills children? What do you mean? Republicans love killing children. What are you talking about? The entire war on terror was done by Republicans. What are you talking about? I want to show you like a war on terror like hype video, but I also don't want to get jacked up by copyright. So I'm not going to show you that video. Sorry. Pol Pot. Well, I also hate Pol Pot. I hate communists. So, right? All right. Anyways, sorry. We've been yapping. Let's go.
People think of woman and think of man. They do think of traditional woman and traditional man.
They think of pussies and dicks, dude.
I don't necessarily think so, dude.
Yeah, I think when you would make an association of man versus woman, right? Well, if somebody's asked a person.
Yeah, Derek, to me, that's unobjectionably evil. What ideology do you like, then? I would say I'm effectively a neocon. So I have conservative tendencies when it comes to fiscal conservatism and social conservatism. I also like republicanism and mixed economy capitalism. And I do think that those should be exported to the exterior world. So, I think neocons go too far with military adventurism. But besides that, probably a neocon.
What is the thing that you would think of if a person was naked that would identify them immediately as a man or a woman?
Pol Pot, so killing children. You are named after Pol Pot, the general secretary of the Khmer Rouge, who killed 25% of the population of his country, who was one of the most murderous shitbags on the planet. And there's the killing fields, just like that, where they have ossuaries of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of human beings slaughtered by the man that you named yourself off of. So I'm not taking moral lessons on killing kids from somebody who's trying to normalize the name of one of the most murderous scumbags on the face of the planet. So, if you want to be chill, hang out and chat, that's fine. If you're annoying, I'm going to ban you. Just letting you know. Do you think I like Pol Pot? That's your name.
All right.
What do you think they would say?
Naked is different. Because
what do you think they would say?
Sure, Andrew.
What would they say?
If their genitals are out, they're going to point out their genitals.
Yeah,
Andrew.
yeah, because why do you think they're going to point out their genitals?
Are most people's genitals out a long time?
Bro, what does that have to do with anything?
Because if someone were to ask me, what do I associate with womanhood? I would say a lot of things that are associated with femininity. Longer hair, wearing certain type of clothing, things of that nature.
Fashion?
To me, that's
fashion.
Wait,
longer hair.
Hold on. In a sense, I'm not saying that that's a comprehensive definition.
He's laughing, but yes.
Definition of woman.
Well, it doesn't even point to it. The same thing.
I'm saying for me, those are things that I value and find attractive in women.
Okay. When I'm saying woman or man, I'm giving a descriptor which is trying to point to something.
Yes.
Right? Point to it. You're trying to say that there's two categories, that man and woman is not just a biological categorization, but there's a social categorization.
And they do adhere to largely their social roles. But when you say that it's not a comprehensive social categorization, right? What else could it be besides self-ID?
What else could it be?
I don't think it has to be one or the other, Andrew. There's ambiguity in definitions. Like, if someone says I'm a woman and like if people say they're not, like what?
Well, first of all, there's not ambiguity in all definitions. But second,
we're butting heads.
But secondly, definitions also operate. They have defining ends. They have defining ends. What is the defining end? What are the things which are the undercurrent of the definition that they're pointing to? They're saying like a chair, right? You might have like little things under the definition of a chair that point to things you sit on, right? Things that you relax on, things like this.
Yes.
That's what's doing all the heavy lifting for the word.
Yes.
What's doing all the heavy lifting for the word man and woman? What is it?
I think it can be and is social roles.
No, it's sex. It's 100% sex doing the heavy lifting for man and woman, dude. Give me a break.
I don't necessarily
Okay,
think so.
demonstrate it. All of the definitions, all of the things which support the definitions of man and woman, all of them are pointing to sex. Literally all of them.
Okay.
Like basically every one of them.
Sure.
If you think reproduction, right?
Okay, and I think that gender is rooted in sex. But as an example, having long hair is not necessarily something that women have to do. They just choose to do it to highlight their femininity. Men don't have to work out and be muscular and all that kind of stuff, but many men choose to do it in order to accentuate their physiology. So saying that, you know, it's rooted in sex. Yeah, of course it's rooted in sex, but there's plenty of behaviors that are across the biological spectrum that are associated with genders, but are not necessarily part of the gender. And so I think that the chair argument, if I was Oliver, I would 100% would be going back to the chair analogy, because I would say, Andrew, this is the equivalent of, if we're talking about chairs, you're saying that chairs are all rooted in the definition of things that you sit on. And I would agree with that assessment. However, that's insufficient in order to describe a chair, right? Soy boys are men too. Yeah, exactly, because they're adult human males. Why do the Twitch chatters have to send in all the weirdos? Because it's Twitch, bro.
If you even
is how people dress biological. So Jack Darko, I understand you might be a little bit more lefty though, but I would say that dressing a certain way is probably partially biological. And what I mean by that is when we look at, like, let's look at medieval armor. Okay. When we look at medieval armor, the things are obviously like functional. So there's like chainmail and all that kind of stuff. But there's a reason why stuff is highlighted the way that it's highlighted, which is effectively replicating male physiology. Like you have a cuirass, you got pauldrons, you got the helmet, you got all that kind of stuff. And so these are aesthetic choices on top of functional armor that seem to accentuate like male physiology, right? And then if we look at female fashion, as a matter of fact, just to solidify the point, let me look at male fashion. I would say that when we look at what a man wears, it's oftentimes to accentuate, you know, like shoulders, thin waist. And that's really like, I think that's the only thing that like men care about is probably thin waist, broad shoulders. And then everything else is like this. Like I would consider this a goofy outfit because it actually de-emphasizes the secondary masculine traits. Whereas I would say this is more like traditional male garb because it's loose enough to be casual, but it's tight enough in order to show off his physiology. And I think that oftentimes what we associate, like this is more like a feminine, in my opinion, Timothy Chalamet is wearing like almost like a woman's suit, but he's wearing a woman's suit because he's made his shoulders look small compared to his hips. You know what I'm saying? So that's where fashion can invert physiology on purpose to be subversive. But I think that traditional fashion ultimately accentuates the secondary sex characteristics of the person that they're doing. Same thing with female fashion, where there can be inversions of what's traditionally considered attractive, like this blows out the shoulders, blows out the waist, and the waist is considered attractive. Same thing with this, where this is like more masculine garb because you're accentuating the shoulders. But if you look at like 90% of what women wear, it's going to be things that minimize their waist, maximize their breasts, maximize their hips, right? This entire outfit, like the dress outfit of maximizing breasts, minimizing hips, minimizing waist, maximizing hips. You're going to see that throughout fashion repeatedly. And you're also going to see it in popular garb, what most people wear. And so my argument is that while fashion is not biological in and of itself, there's probably a subconscious biological motivation by human beings who wish to procreate to emphasize their secondary sex characteristics and also to minimize their flaws. That would be my argumentation. Like this woman, the reason why she picked this outfit is because she wants to emphasize her secondary sex characteristics. So she's found attractive by men, 100%. Gender is kind of made up. No, it's not. It's a social expression of sex. Yeah. Parallax says gender isn't made up. It's downstream from sex. Yes. White. True. Stop showing knight armor. This is white supremacy. Well, we could take a look at samurai armor if you wanted. Big dong. True. Men's fashion used to be extremely effeminate by today's standards. Yeah, for nobles, though. But I would say that the noble medieval fashion, I think the reason why they wanted to emphasize like the more feminine traits of the nobility is because they didn't want to be associated with the barbarism of masculinity. So if you look at like Renaissance male fashion is definitely flamboyant, I guess is the best way to say it. But the point is that they're trying to de-emphasize how brutish they are. So it does depend on like value sets, 100%. Breast maxers, cod piece. Oh my God, you guys are crazy. You guys are having fun. Designing pants to emphasize the size of your wang. Exactly. Plague doctors. Yeah, plague doctors were dope. Plague doctors, I would not say are a gendered fashion choice, but they do go hard as hell. Look at a plague doctor. And by the way, this mask is functional. So they made the beaked mask and they put flower petals in the front of it so they could smell the flowers instead of the diseased bodies of the sick people they treated. And then of course they had the robes and the gloves that covered their entire body in order to reduce their exposure to disease. So even though this was before germ theory, they still had some idea that exposure to the sick could make yourself ill. It's kind of dope. I love plague doctors. I think they look awesome. Check Henry VIII's armor. Okay, we're getting distracted. We'll get back into the content momentarily, but I do love me a good set of armor. Henry VIII armor. Oh yeah. Dude's a tank. I don't know if this is the one that you're talking about, but it's got like gold inlays. Look at that cod piece. Dude, look at that cod piece. Don't tell me that cod piece isn't gendered. Now, of course, you have like the I'm sorry, that's so funny. You do have the Highlanders, like the Scots who wore the kilts, which is typically skirts are typically associated with being feminine. But I think that's because the Scots were so masculine, right? They had to de-emphasize their masculinity through a skirt because otherwise they were just too masculine for the world, right? So sorry. Let's look at that and then let the content flow. I know I'm letting chat drag me down a side piece, but Scottish Highland warrior kilts. So these dudes, the reason why they had to wear Catholic schoolgirl skirts is because the Scottish Highlanders were so masculine that if they didn't feminize to some degree, they just would have conquered the entire planet. Right? Look at this dude. Like, obviously this is an artist depiction, but if this guy wore typical trousers, he would just conquer all of Europe, right? This guy would likewise conquer all of Europe if he was wearing typical trousers. So they had to wear a girlish outfit in order to minimize their masculinity, or else they would have just been too powerful. God needed to give them a nerf. Oh, geez. The English nerfed them. Yeah. The Scots knew if they didn't fend themselves up, it'd be too easy of a fight. Yeah. And like the naked Celts or the Picts, the guys who just like they covered themselves in blue tattoos and charged into battle naked, high on mushrooms. Those guys were, they were, their power level was too high. Yeah. All right. We've had too much fun. Let the content flow.
Woman, even when it comes to woman, right?
Okay.
Adult human female. If you look up the definition of female, especially human female, it says like a member of the human race which is associated with reproduction, right?
Okay.
It's literally utilizing the reproductive categorization of genitalia, right?
Well, there's genitalia. I mean, there's a difference.
It's genitalia. Oh, how do they get pregnant, bro?
Difference between the reproductive system.
Yeah, how do they
and
get
genitalia.
how do they get pregnant?
I'm not saying it doesn't involve genitalia.
Of course it does.
If
So
someone- if
all
someone-
of it is being held up by sex. All of it, dude.
No, most people do not deny that gender expression is rooted in sex. The question is whether or not it necessarily roots in sex, and the question of whether or not human beings are socially complex enough for there to be people who associate with the opposite sex psychologically, and then also whether or not we even care. That's the argument. Gametes. Yeah, I like the gamete argument as well, because effectively, if you talk about like small and large gametes, this is something that is replicated across the natural world. Of course, there's some exceptions, but the small and large gamete is a replication of the duality of like a sperm and an egg. And there are plenty of biological species that use large and small gametes in order to reproduce. So, again, it's all rooted in this, but that doesn't mean that rooting is definitive.
Okay. If someone doesn't
Okay.
have the internal reproductive organs but has a vagina, do you think they're a woman?
Of course, and I
They
can
are?
even dive into that too. So the monolithic argument for gender is my favorite one. I wouldn't say that a man who was castrated, right, through no fault of his own, he was in a terrific accident, his genitals were ripped off. Of course, he's still a man, but here's why. Because people only develop around two pathways. That's it. There's no third sex. There's never going to be a third sex. Nobody alive has ever been able to impregnate themselves, not even chimeras. Because of that, there's only two reproductive pathways available, period. You're still a woman. Even if you don't have a uterus, your reproductive pathway was still developed to that of a woman, to that of a female.
But it didn't develop.
It did develop.
Well, a lot of these people who have this condition, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, are those who have XY chromosomes and develop along a male pathway.
No, they
but it goes
developed
wrong.
that. Even if you have XXY, right? Or there are actually men who just have XX, but their reproductive pathway can only be one of two. They can only develop along two reproductive pathways, period, regardless of chromosomes. And that's every human being who exists, even ones who have the nature of their the nature of them is ambiguous, right? The ambiguity around genitalia and things like this are ambiguous. They still can only go down one phenotypical pathway, period.
Okay.
And genotypical. So if sex is doing all of the heavy,
And I feel like this is where Andrew's audience, because he does has a substantive audience, because he goes on to whatever podcast and just bullies women for hours on end, which has resulted in 3,000 to 5,000 live stream viewers watching him just bully women. I wonder if they find this compelling just because he's explaining and the other person is saying okay, but that has nothing to do with the veracity of the arguments, right? So Oliver can agree to gender being rooted in biology and still believe that trans people exist, right? Just because it's rooted in biology doesn't mean that there aren't going to be, different social expressions that manifest themselves that are atypical, where somebody who was born male wishes to express themselves as a woman, or somebody born female, vice versa. So he's taking like 10 minutes in order to make a factual line of argumentation that isn't in dispute. Jack Darko says, Andrew is such an effing hack. A binary is an exclusive disjunction, meaning everything is either A or B, not B and not A. You don't need a third effing sex to break the binary. Argumentatively, I think I understand what you're saying. What if there is a Z chromosome? Could that make us go Super Saiyan? God, I wish. But they already had gendered roles at the time. With what, Peter Pan Lapel? I'm not sure what you're asking in reference to, but I expect that there have been relatively stereotypical gendered roles that vary, but are bimodal across many societies. So even like in the seahorse population, where males raise the children, there's still bimodal distribution of responsibilities. And in the human species, they obviously correlate with like strong correlates, where women typically take care of the children because children are reliant on breastfeeding for their health for like the first like year or two. And then women oftentimes will take on a nurturing role after that, whereas males have oftentimes been given the provider role. Now, that's not to say that no males can ever be nurturers and no females can ever be providers, but it is to say that like culture has split. What about 70 to 80 rock stars? Well, right, but these are like social exceptions where they're playing with gender for fun. The Riaz 15 says Connor doesn't like Andrew treating women like he does men. Yeah, man, I'm sexist. Yeah. I think that you should treat women better than you treat men. Because I'm a what do they call that, where you're misogynist, but you're like trying to be nice in the way that you're misogynist? It's like paternalistic. I'm paternalistic towards women. You're right. 100%. Oh, yeah. You guys are having fun. Benevolent sexism. There we go. That's what I was looking for.
Heavy lifting. I think that it is fine for us to point at man and woman and say a man, right, is someone who developed along the reproductive pathway for the production of small gametes, and woman for ova.
Sure.
It doesn't require they have a uterus.
Yeah,
they still develop down that pathway,
sure.
right?
And yeah, that absolutely is a biological definition. But we use those words in other ways, right?
No, we don't.
We don't. When we say well, then how come we can say a woman is manly and the sentence makes sense? Because we're saying
pointing to masculine or feminine virtues.
Agreed.
Virtues.
But we use those terms to refer to social phenomena, right?
Well, no,
manly,
not always.
Womanly.
Actually, most of the time, right?
Now he's being obtuse. I feel like he has to know he's being obtuse, because in a debate you don't get much. The audience, your opposing audience always hates you, and your friendly audience probably supports you, but they don't want you to concede to the other side. And so if you want to be thought of as a strong debater, then you concede nothing. But I think that that's a double-edged sword, where you can't concede to reality, where instead of admitting that oftentimes when you say somebody is being manly, you're describing attributes that are social phenomena that are not necessarily biological. Instead of just accepting that as true, he goes, well, not all the time. And it's like, well, not all the time was not the argument, you know? Reckless Ambivalence says, I wonder if these two men know what debating this stuff like they do makes it seem like they really care about these topics and how other people live their lives. I don't think that's a problem. I care about how you live your life. I want you to work a job, pay your taxes, pay your bills. I want you to take care of your family insofar as they exist. I want you to take care of your community. I care about how you exist in the world, and I want you to be better than you are right now.
When you're doing that, there is times when this is done. I agree with you, where you're like, oh, that chick is, or you're nagging me like a woman. Yeah. Right.
How many people in the comments right now do you think are calling me a woman?
But but the whole point of that, right, is to say that like you're weaker than me or this or that. You're still actually associating this with the sex. You're still associating it with the fact that that's the weaker sex, or that's the more dominant sex. Basically, all of those social interactions still revolve around that same idea.
Sure, I haven't denied that.
Yeah, I mean, so they're always pointing, in other words, all extremes for gender are always actually only pointing to two things, male, female. That's it. So if that's the case, when we're talking about social roles in society, men and women, male, female, are completely different. I mean, totally different across the board. We're humans, true, right?
Mhm.
But everything from our developmental pathway for reproduction, right, to our physical characteristics are completely different. Why in the world would you prescribe a society which didn't bank on the ideas of that and understand that if we are to push the very things which combine our physiology with the social status of people creates a better society? For instance, would you prescribe?
Well, they're moving into a different argument, so I want to address chat real quick. Void of Parrot says, just because it's common sense for sex, or just because it's common for sex to be bimodal doesn't necessarily mean they are categorically are. At one point in time, all life was prokaryotic, doesn't mean that life categorically was. Yeah, I agree, but rules in and of themselves almost necessitate exceptions. And what I mean by that is gravity is a rule. I think they even call it the law of gravity, right? So when I drop something, it's going to fall to the ground because of a predictive force called gravity. But there are exceptions to that rule. For instance, when you go into like a wind tunnel, like skydiving. Now, you can have explanatory phenomena like the fact that thrust and lift can defy gravity, but that doesn't mean that, you know, the rule is broken. It means that there's an exception to the rule, right? So that's where, for me, this isn't enough for Andrew. Kind of did concede that there were exceptions to the rule, but at the same time, he keeps saying it's rooted in biology. He's not using the word rooted, but because he wants to say it's all biology, because he doesn't want to concede that there's a social phenomena that can sometimes defy biology, and that we could accept that as a complex social species. Because if he does accept that, then he has to accept the fact that trans people do exist and that trans people can be a valid form of human expression. Whereas he would say, in my opinion, he would probably argue that from his perspective, God and Christ dictated the way that humans should live. There are some passages that say that men should be men and women should be women. Therefore, trans people are defying nature and defying God by pursuing life as the opposite gender expression. Biology as rules to dummy. True. Reckless Ambivalence says, that's a fair point. People are set on insisting men and women are the same and therefore capable of equally achieving the same things within a society that was designed for men's strength, rather than changing society to equally accommodate the strengths of both men and women. We're a complementary species. That is one of the things that's really frustrating to me, is that we've allowed these psychopaths, no offense, Andrew, parasocial love, but we've allowed red pill psychopaths and sorry to all the, the pro-sex women, but prostitutes to dominate the conversation. And so as a result, we feel like the sexes and the genders are at constant war, which isn't true. We're complementary species. I couldn't achieve as much as I wanted to in my life without my wife. My wife could not achieve as much as she wanted to in her life without me. We're complementary. I fulfill some of the masculine and male roles within our relationship. She fulfills a substantive amount of the feminine and women roles within the relationship. And then when there's something that gets dropped between two of us, one of us picks up that slack. We're complementary and we're designed to be so. And as much as there's biblical passages saying that men are men and women are women, there's also biblical passages saying that men are not somehow like this authoritarian, dogmatic, fascistic leader within relationships. They have to love their women as they love themselves, and they have to love their women as Christ loved the church. So it's not this, it can be paternalistic, but it's not dictatorial. Conservative liberalism says gravity isn't explained, so it's not a law, still a theory. Interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was a law, but I could be wrong. If Jesus was born of a virgin, does that mean he has XX chromosomes? No idea. How is he a psychopath? You just slander stupidity. So what? You're different and meant to be different things. What? Well, and you might be being a little bit too sensitive. Chill out. When Andrew is doing all the BS, I find myself thinking, how are we humans once killed people for saying the earth was round and we revolved around the sun? Oh yeah, well, and so actually I'll go ahead and take this on and I'll actually explain it. So psychopath. Psychopath doesn't mean like serial killer. Psychopath means that you don't empathize with other people. And I think that while Andrew probably does have a higher degree of empathy than the other person. Andrew Wilson, fat woman. So let me find, there's a clip. I'll go to YouTube. There's a clip of Andrew Wilson laughing at a fat woman who says that she's a 6. Andrew Wilson, fat woman. And so I'm sure that from his line of argumentation, he would say that this fat woman said something rude to him. And so as a result, he was allowed to be super rude to her. I don't care. But there's a clip where he's doing like a video stream and he's just bullying the shit out of this large woman, just bullying the hell out of her. And you can tell that the woman is kind of like uncomfortable and embarrassed. And so somebody with empathy, a strong sense of empathy, would probably cringe at the fact that they hurt someone, even if that person deserved it. They might have cringed. Yeah, right here. Here it is. Hold on. Let's watch this. I'll literally just let the cringe flow. You asked for it. I'm gonna give it to you.
Stifler asked everyone to rate their looks on a scale of 1 to 10. You can't pick 7.
I would give myself a realistic 6.5. Okay.
Oh my God.
Rude it, Andrew.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I wasn't muted? I'm sorry.
Yeah, dude, we could hear. We heard that, Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, man.
We can see you too.
I was laughing at something my chat said.
Bruh. So, yeah, but it's not a question of whether or not, like, some of you are like, base. Yeah, it's funny. It's not realistic. Okay, and did you see the woman who is another human being get embarrassed and hurt psychologically? Look at that. So she's looking, he's laughing. We can't really see her face. But this look is like, oh shit. This dude's laughing at me like a, like I'm an a-hole, right? Okay, I would argue that she embarrassed herself with her lack of self-awareness. Okay, which is totally true. However, you can make that worse or you can make that better, right? So if you're a nice, kind person, then you would say, hey, listen, I think that based off the situation, I think your assessment of reality is unrealistic, right? I think that you being heavy actually reduces the way that you should evaluate yourself, right? That's how you would say it if you were trying to be polite while still communicating the same point. Whereas Andrew is like, lol, you're an idiot. Yeah, but you're just proving the point. The Rizzle 15 says she was an OnlyFans chick, so who cares? Well, I mean, I don't care. I don't care that you don't care. It's not a question of whether or not it's entertaining. It can be entertaining to you to watch somebody being mean. But you threw up your hands when I used the term psychopath. You were like, oh, how dare you? And then I just showed you him being cruel to a woman and not having vicarious cringe and sympathy and empathy for another person. I think that's a little sociopathic, a little psychopathic. So anyways, let us continue.
Like if we're talking about the military, would you prescribe that we had more women in the military than men?
More women than men in the military? Largely probably not, because they don't meet the same standards. And
of course not.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah, of course. So then a failing of courage of men, considering that they have to take on that role, that dominant, but they have to, right?
Not.
No. They always have to.
No man is obligated to join the military. Therefore, it's not.
Yeah, they are. They can be drafted.
Okay, I don't agree with the draft.
It doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. They can descriptively be drafted, and women can't.
And that's unjust.
That's unjust.
Yes.
Okay, so
there shouldn't be a draft.
So what about police officers, police force? You can be deputized.
Yeah, I think that's
unjust too. Yep. You can be compelled into a posse. That's unjust.
Define. Sorry.
Compelled into a posse, just like you can be compelled into jury duty, right?
Sure, jury duty. I think it's a little bit different because you're not putting yourself in as much harm's way. I don't think that anyone should be.
Yeah, Derek says, wait, what? So I don't know if there's an act called posse comitatus. I forget what it is. I think it's like the limitations of military operations on U.S. soil. I forget what it is. Let's take a look at it. Posse comitatus, from Latin, power of the country, refers to a group of citizens mobilized by a sheriff or other law enforcement official to assist in suppressing lawlessness, apprehending criminals, or maintaining order within a county. The term also refers to the Posse Comitatus Act, a federal law that generally prohibits the use of federal military personnel for domestic law enforcement. Excuse me. So that's like the prohibition against it, but it's also a description of how you can be deputized into a posse, which, by the way, it's gendered wise, it's going to be disproportionately males who are subject to the draft, capable of being deputized, capable of being thrown into a posse based off of regional laws that were written 200 years ago. But number one, I don't think these rules have been invoked probably within like 150 years. And then number two, the other guy, Oliver, has said, yes, I think that security services are going to break male, but it's not necessarily going to be all male, right? K-Soko, so he's probably an incel and jealous of the fat girl. I don't know who you're talking about, but Andrew Wilson is married with children, so he is not an incel. Also, I know you're probably joking, though. Also, Andrew would take being called a psychopath as base. He used to call himself Big Papa Fascist to own the libs. True. Deputizing people to be police. Yeah. Derek, I've been thinking about it, and a saddle design for one person fits my chair definition. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Grassroots Hegemon at Counterpoints channel membership finds a way. So true. Thank you again for the generosity. Sapient Green, Pondering Politics, AD, K-Soko, Grassroots Hegemon, Christian Vlaris, and Harmonic Fox. Thank you kindly. I really do appreciate it.
Conscripted into being a police officer or being that. Because of course there are
there's always dangers. There's always dangers associated with all of this, including jury duty, right?
And there's going to be a threshold, right? Okay.
Which is what?
We don't know exact. Of course, I don't have to point. Wait, I don't have to point to an exact point to say that there is a difference between sitting on a jury duty and having a gun on you and potentially people shooting at you.
You do if you say that the consistency of the ideology is that you don't believe in this thing because it can put you in harm's way. But this thing also puts you in harm's way.
Significant harm.
So
fine. Okay. Yeah. Of course. I'm not arguing there's not a threshold, Andrew.
But not just that.
I'm not arguing there's not a threshold.
Let's start with the Titanic. So should the men have given up the lifeboats to the women?
Men giving up the lifeboats to the women?
And the children?
If they were largely stronger, then yes. However, if there wait a second, if there was a disabled man, if there was a man who for some reason was weaker, then I think then he should have gone with those people. So it's a strong versus weak, not necessarily along sexed lines. There is a lot of overlap there, but it's not necessary.
Whoa. Okay. So to make sure I got this right, though, you agree with me that the average man is many times stronger than the average woman.
Well, largely in terms of like upper body strength or something like that? Yes.
No, lower body too.
Lower body, yes, because it would depend what you mean by strength, because for example, like endurance and things of that nature, women in certain cases are stronger.
What did I say? Average is certain cases now?
Well, I think that women in general are better at endurance running.
No,
I would have to look more into it. I think in certain...
No.
Okay.
On average, they're not. They're not better at anything physical than men. Nothing. Literally nothing. When you say, children? What's really funny about this too is like when you say, well, what about lower body? It is true that proportionally women have stronger lower bodies than men, right? For women, proportionally that's true. Men still have much stronger lower bodies than women. Of course, it's just that proportional to the size of men versus women. I'm not arguing that
women are physically stronger.
Yeah. So then, if that's the case, aren't you creating a bias in society by saying that the strong, right, should be necessarily like giving up their spots for the weak, when you agree with me that on average, men are going to be much stronger than on average women?
I don't think it's a bias. I think it's people who have certain advantages should use those advantages to help those who are less well off.
Okay.
That would be an example
so
of courage,
right?
How
would that not disproportionately affect men?
It would disproportionately affect men. I'm not saying it.
So you're okay.
That's not
now, bro. Come on.
How the fuck is that?
Well, yeah, he keeps laughing, but there's no contradiction within the worldview. There is no contradiction here. Oliver isn't this like stereotype, which I understand that we got really used to debating stereotypes in Twitch and YouTube politics for a very long time. but Oliver seems to be focused more on what's real rather than what's fits in neatly to a descriptive ideology. So because all the way back in the beginning, we had a definition: equal rights, freedom, opportunities should be maximized, and gender-only barriers should be eliminated. This isn't contradictory. Having an equal right has nothing to do with strength. Having equal freedom doesn't have to do with strength. Having equal opportunities should be maximized, and gender-only barriers should be eliminated. That gender-only is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So Andrew's acting like he's caught in some kind of hypocrisy, but he's never forwarded an argument that actually is hypocritical here.
Okay, so why should they do that?
Why should they do that?
Yeah.
I already said because people should protect those who.
All right, real quick, checking in with chat. Andrew Giannakolopoulos says, fun fact, women are better endurance runners, but only when we're talking about ultra marathons, 50 miles plus. That's interesting. Lifeboats should have been allocated along net worth. Input brave standing man. Jack Darko says, lol, your mitochondria have estrogen receptors that modulate cellular respiration. F me, why did I ever study biology? Well, that's your fault, isn't it? Are women better at gymnastics or something? No idea. Christian Blair says, paying music for a sinking ship has got to be one of the whitest things to ever happen. True. All right, hold up. Quick shill time. You guys have been more than generous today, but I do just want to shout it out real quick. We had a very kind donation early in the stream from Sapient Green, Pondering Politics, AD, and K-Soko. K-Soko became a member of their own regard. Then Mr. Grassroots was very kind and gifted like 95 memberships, something crazy like that, just absolute bananas. And then Christian Valeris and Harmonic Fox became members afterwards. So I really do appreciate it. Of course, if you don't carry on your membership, I'm not going to take it personally at all. However, the obvious goal is if you guys become members and instead of giving like, I don't know, $5 per super chat, but you just do $2 a month, $5 a month, whatever, and then you carry that forward, then that kind of financial support can stabilize the channel to the point that we can reach out and do crazy stuff because we have enough, low but real financial support. So I want to thank Grassroots for doing that. That was huge. I want to thank the other donors and chat members who became members because that was huge. So parasocial love to you and yours. Remember to like, I'm not leaving, not yet, but like the stream, become a member if you are not a member already, become a follower or subscriber if you're not a member already. Super chats are appreciated, but never required. Let's continue.
Who are weaker than them. Once again, claim that I'm stipulating. If you disagree and don't think those who are stronger should use that to protect those who are less strong, then I guess this doesn't follow. But I think that's a pretty strong intuition that most people hold.
Let's make sure that you hold this intuition then, okay?
Yeah.
So would you consider like a 13-year-old boy to be a child?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree with me that 13-year-old boys can be about as strong as the average woman?
Sure, I would depend. I'm not sure.
So should 13-year-old boys give up their seats on the lifeboat for women?
Maybe it's a case by case dependent basis. I think you should try to save women and children because
should the 13-year-old give up their spot in the lifeboat for a 70-year-old woman?
No, because
No.
I think there's a longer lifespan. Wait, Andrew, this is what you did.
Yeah, here we go.
No, this is what you did. I'm gonna explain what you did. You took one categorization that I made and general prescription.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's not consistent,
that
bro.
those who are stronger should generally protect those who are weaker. That's what I said. And you're saying, so in every single case where there's someone who's stronger, they should protect someone who's weaker overriding
you didn't
consideration?
say generally.
Did I not say generally?
No, you actually
sure?
just said that stronger people should protect weaker people.
Okay, then I meant that in the general sense. I'm sorry for not specifying.
So generally speaking, then men are going to be disadvantaged in society under your view.
I don't think they're going to be disadvantaged because they have the advantage of more strength. So them using that strength to protect.
Oliver's perspective is perfectly coherent. Andrew is being obtuse.
Yeah, but you're prescribing a duty. You haven't actually told me why it is. So, for instance, do you agree that men and women's lives are equally valuable?
Equally valuable? Yeah.
Okay, then why the fuck would you say that they should give up their spots in the lifeboat because they're stronger?
Equally valuable, because I think if you were talking about a boat sinking, I think most men would probably be better able to swim longer, be able to survive
in the icy fucking waters of the fucking. Are you serious? The icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean, they're going to have a better fighting chance against the sharks. Like, what are you talking? What?
Wait.
Number one, that's still true. Even if their chances are 0, men probably would survive longer than the women. And then not just that, but we all conceptualize this, but we don't articulate it. So I think this is actually interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and full screen myself, and I'm going to describe this to you guys, because we can understand this, relatively speaking, because it's from like chivalric codes. Now, chivalric codes are fairly old, and I think a lot of them actually, the main one doesn't even describe a lot of behavior. We just associate it with like positive masculine behavior, right? That's what we mean when we reference chivalry. But what happens is that with chivalry, we associate men being willing to sacrifice themselves for women and children with that code of behavior. And then we also can even do the calculation between the old woman and the young boy. So we do a subconscious calculation where men are the people who jump on grenades, are the people who are self-sacrificing, are the people who typically will work to other people's benefits. So as the protectors, they should default to sacrificing themselves for the people who are too weak to defend themselves. Okay, so we kind of put men to the side, right? And then we also do a subconscious calculation where we don't just say women and we don't just say men, we also say women and children are the ones who need to be saved. And the reason why we do the calculation for children is because children have greater potential to live, boys and girls. They haven't fully come up to adulthood, and therefore there's a bunch of unrealized potential. And so we want to preserve that potential for as long as possible, which is why we preserve male and female children more than men. And then when it comes to the calculation between children and women, the reason why we prioritize women, we prioritize children over women, is because women might have lived a certain level of their potentiality, and their value comes from being able to have more children on a subconscious level, right? So when it comes to that 75-year-old woman, the reason why we would pick the 13-year-old child to live over the 75-year-old woman is because the 75-year-old woman has already fulfilled her biological purpose. The average life expectancy is 74. So she's already a year past her expiration date anyways. And so we would prioritize a 13-year-old male over a 74-year-old female. So this is all fairly complex to articulate, because oftentimes we just presume this level of like moral calculation. However, presuming that moral calculation doesn't mean that moral calculation isn't correct. And just because it disadvantages men doesn't mean shit. Because I almost guarantee you that whenever Andrew Wilson argues against the disadvantaging of men, it's a rhetorical strategy in order to get feminists to eat their words, because they fight for egalitarianism. Whereas I almost guarantee you that how do I argue this? That, excuse me, the stereotypical masculine acceptance of responsibility and sacrifice is healthy for society. And I think he would agree with that. Here's what the promise says: you're making the best of a bad situation at that point. There's no good outcome. Not sure what we're referencing specifically, but I appreciate the comment. Commander Haircut says, when you can't argue, have a mini tantrum to get the audience clapping for you. Well, he's not even having a mini tantrum. He's just laughing, which is like, you should probably explain why you're laughing if you think that you're so funny. Reckless Ambivalence says, I mean, men are most likely to want to die in some way that has meaning. True. The 13-year-old status as a child overrides their status as a male. Yes. Yeah. So we kind of all subconsciously understand this. I mean, yeah. Okay. Seems like most people are there. Oliver the Twist says, even if the men all died in 20 minutes, that would have been likely lower in women. So maximizing survival time gives maximum percentage of chance of being saved. Therefore, strong sacrifice for the weak. Yes. Void Parrot says, even if there's like a 0% chance of getting saved, it's still true. Wait, wouldn't men having a higher likelihood of surviving by an argument for men getting in the lifeboats? No, because the struggle, the lifeboats is preserving the life that we prioritize. Grasser Tachibon says, check your PayPal again. Why would I check my PayPal again? Were you nice again? Were you freakishly nice again and were way too generous to the channel? Bruh, too kind. You are too kind. So let me put that into my account. Thank you. Instant transfer. Transfer. Everyone thank Grassroots Hegemon. Honestly, just wiling out, supporting the stream. And then I will give out more memberships momentarily. Let's continue with the content while we're doing this. And then I'll give out the memberships, and then we'll stop and thank and chill.
Hold on. Andrew.
Come on, bro.
Dude.
This is fucking
This is not-
crazy.
no, there-
It's not. Andrew's acting smug without having made an actual point, and there's actually no incoherence in Oliver's line of argumentation.
Andrew,
Okay.
are you not agreeing with me?
Uh-huh.
Who do you think would survive longer in the icy water?
I
Man or
think you're
woman?
talking about seconds or minutes, perhaps.
Okay. And if there were rescue boats going by?
There's
Men
not
should get to
rescue
them?
boats. There wasn't rescue boats going
Yeah,
by,
well, I'm
bro.
glad we're not in that situation anymore.
Yeah, but
So
I
what
am
should
asking you
happen
about
now?
that situation. You said
Okay.
they should
Okay.
give up their spots
Sure.
on the Titanic.
Mhm.
The women get the lifeboats
Yes.
because the men are stronger, even though their
Yes.
lives are both equally valuable.
Yes.
Why?
I think that some men should do that. Absolutely.
Why?
Why? Because you should want to protect those who are weaker than you.
Why though? Why though? If
on,
it's just a matter of you saying because you're stronger, then you switch. What you're doing is switching your case use here, which is fucking. It's equivocation. It's pissing me off because it's not.
No, it's not. You're being obtuse. Andrew's being obtuse.
It's not even genuine. You're making the equivocal case that wait a second. Right? Men generally are stronger than women, so therefore should protect them because generally stronger people should protect weaker people.
Yes.
Okay, that follows in that aspect. You're a bit stronger, right?
Yes.
You have some sort of like duty or obligation to protect those weaker than you. But when you're in a situation like the fucking Titanic, right, where your strength differential doesn't fucking matter at all,
Okay.
right? You still prescribe that the women get the lifeboats, bro. And I need you to tell me why.
Why should they get the lifeboats? I think I am then expressing an intuition based on that case that is based on the fact that men are generally stronger than women. So maybe in
How
this
is
case,
that helpful?
Hold on. Maybe in this case, then they shouldn't, because this case doesn't involve strength or anything like that. So in this case, then maybe not. In the Titanic, in that case, then yeah, maybe
Okay,
not.
so you're
If we're talking
retracting that?
and yeah, I'll
Okay, so you're gonna
retract it.
And everybody thank Grassroots Hegemon. This gift is coming from him. He PayPal'd me, and then I have gifted them as memberships. So if you didn't receive a membership, I do apologize. However, Grassroots has been more than kind today. Connor, am I going to watch Skulls this week? Of course. I hope they actually announce something that's like relevant instead of just like we're getting a new monster in Space Marine 2. It's like, okay. Cool. Thanks for sharing. Excuse me. And hold on. So, yes, let's continue. But thank you, Grassroots. Thank you for your donations. It's more than kind. Absolutely insane levels of support. Genuinely appreciated. I don't know how to thank you. You're effectively what's going on. Just explain this. I'm going to take this over here, and I'm going to thank Grassroots, but also thank you guys as well. So effectively what's going on, just to share, is I was hired by a company called Valor Media. That's an offshoot of Midas Touch. We're creating pre-recorded and post-recorded and live content for them. And so we really have 6 months in order to make it work. And we're already a month into it. And we have back-end stuff that we've been working on in order to make the content flow better, make the content better, make the thumbs better, make the editing better, all that kind of stuff. But we still haven't fully integrated that, and it might take another few weeks to integrate. So we're already 2 months into the project, and we still have like very simple, basic stuff that needs to get done. Now, that being said, in 6 months, Midas is a very lucrative operation. So they could say, oh, well, we're seeing money coming in, we're seeing ads, we see the potential in the content, et cetera, we're going to continue the project. Or they could say, well, realistically, we were looking for a bigger response. We're not getting that much of a response. Therefore, we're pulling the plug. So as far as I know, in 5 months, I could be going back to the workforce. It is what it is. They are paying me a little bit, not a lot, but they're paying me a little bit in order to subsist effectively for the 6 month trial period. But what's going on is when we have people like Dr. Zayas has donated stuff, Sapient Green's donated stuff, Pondering Politics has donated stuff, AD's donated, Christian Valeris has donated, Gen X has donated, Harmonic Fox has become a member, and there's another half dozen to another dozen people, Al Soko. Keisoko. There's another half dozen people who have all supported, probably even a dozen people who have all supported with obviously their views, obviously their likes, obviously financially, but then Grassroots has just blown it out of the water because he has the capacity to do so. He's effectively my daddy J-Mac. You know, I say that in a non-homosexual way. So it warms my heart. It makes me extremely happy, and it makes me excited to push this content. Because if we get through the next 6 months of pumping out content and then we start building up ad revenue to the point that I can support my subsistence salary with the ad revenue from the Counterpoints main channel, then boom, this becomes my job for the rest of my life and this is my career. So effectively, I want to thank all of you. Kingslayer Damocles is another person who's donated. I know Sacred Snow has donated. So I want to thank all of you for number one, watching, number two, liking, number three, engaging in chat, number four, engaging with the VODs, and number five, with your financial support. It really does mean a lot. It means a lot. Oh, so parasocial love, and thank you for your support. I'm not trying to cry in front of you. I'm not trying to give you man tears, but I could, if I wish to summon man tears, I could right now.
Retract
For
that.
women. I'll retract the claim for they should give it up for women. Maybe not children though, because children would have a longer lifespan ahead of them. And men and women's lives, I would agree, are roughly equal. But you can argue that children's lives, many people would consider them more valuable because they have a longer life to live.
Okay, so then men don't have an obligation to sacrifice their lives for women.
No. I don't
Okay,
think necessarily.
got it. They don't have.
I don't think. No, I don't think each individual man. I think society has an obligation to protect those who are weaker, but I think that no individual person should be compelled to risk or like.
Well, I didn't say compelled.
Life.
I asked about duty. That wouldn't be
Men.
like a foreign compellence.
No, I don't think men have that duty. No.
They don't have that duty.
Men in general, no. Those who are stronger, not to die for other people necessarily.
So you don't think.
And this is actually where I flip-flop back, and now I agree with Andrew because I think men do have that duty.
That there's a social obligation inside of society which shames men if they don't protect women who are physically weaker than them?
I think there is, but the thing is also I think a man is much less likely to die than a woman in those situations.
Yeah, so what?
So then it's much
But he's
less likely.
much more likely to be shamed for not interjecting himself in the situation, which would mean.
So Sacred Snow says, man, I hate semantic debates. And I am with you. I think that we did pull out some golden nuggets here, effectively that I think Andrew's being a little bit of a pedant. And I think that Oliver doesn't have a lot of incoherence in his worldviews, and Andrew is effectively acting like he does. That being said, I think Oliver is fundamentally incorrect, and Andrew is more correct in the regards that men do have specific duties to society. And I think women do have specific duties to society. That might be more of like a chud conservative take, but I legitimately do believe in it. So rewards from duties, super chats, past partners in the bedroom, open relationships that talk about those people, heated over internet critique, women worshiping, return to duties, discussing age gaps, legality, and Christian ethics. So what I'm going to do, just so we don't drag out that, I want to check out rewards from duties because I think that could be interesting. Because if they actually talk about, there are rewards from participating in your social duties along a gendered bias. So the reason why I think that some people like to listen to me is because I fulfilled my social duties by doing, by doing law enforcement, by doing the military. I fulfilled what we view as like duties that some men have to society. And so as a result, people want to hear what I have to say in reference to those topics. And then I think that women can also get rewards from their duties if you view child rearing and perpetuating the species as a potential duty for women. Then, of course, not only do you get your kids, but if you like your kids and they're cool and they're fun and they're awesome, then there's all sorts of social benefits that come from having a family. So I'm curious to see how Oliver describes duties and social rewards for duties and Andrew Wilson.
So the thing is, it's like,
fine. Then I am in full agreement with
and John says, what do the gifts do? Well, realistically, I'll get with Danabo. We do have emojis from a previous channel. We'll put emojis in chat so you can spam emojis effectively, and we'll get custom emojis. I know that DGG, I had my broom out where I was sweeping across the screen, and they actually made an animated emoji of me sweeping across the screen so you could spam emojis. And then we could come up with other silly ones that are obnoxious. Why can't you just be normal? Here to the promise says, yeah, true. Eben says, good to see you again, by the way. I don't know why it has to be analyzed regarding adults protecting one another. I believe parents, guardians, regardless of sex, will be judged poorly for not protecting their children. Yeah, and that's what they're arguing about. They're arguing whether or not there's a gender dynamic to the women and children first meme, and there obviously is. Kesoko says, I listen because you have average Joe vibes with realistic based on reality centrist politics. You are the YouTuber blue collar never Trump guy. Excellent. I need to up my blue collar bona fides. I need to go jump on a roof and nail in some asphalt shingles. Sacred Snow says, I like you because you stand on principle and do it in good faith. You also do a good job of parsing through the bullshit. Thank you. This means a lot. Along with the financial support, today has been a glorious day. Thank you, Sacred Snow. Thank you, Kesoko. Don't make me cry.
That wanting to punish people is a bad reason for doing that.
So what reward? Okay, so for this duty that is going to disproportionately affect men, but isn't meant to target men, just people who are stronger. What do they get out of this?
What do they get out? I don't think that duties necessitate rewards. For example, I don't think we should reward people for like using their strength to benefit others. I just think that's something that you ought to do. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, you shouldn't beat your wife. It's like, I didn't beat my wife today. You should give me more money. It's like, of course not.
Isn't a draft duty which necessarily benefits others based on strength?
I don't agree with the draft because it's compulsory.
Yeah, so is this duty though. It's compulsory, right? People ought do it, you said? Isn't that a compulsion?
Sure. 100%. I'm not, but that's a legal compulsion. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be general societal like pushes towards certain things, but I don't think it should be legally compelled in which you go to jail or are killed for not.
Yeah, and then again, pointing to inconsistency where I don't think it exists. Duty is a moral or legal obligation, a responsibility, a task or action that someone is required to perform. So that's where, for me, Oliver is not being hypocritical. He's not being inconsistent because it can be moral or legal. So with the draft, it's a legal duty because if you disobey it, you go to jail. But you can also argue that defending your society, defending your community is a moral duty where you're responsible and you should do it. You should be obliged to do it. But if there isn't a legal consequence, are you really able to reinforce it? So Oliver, once again, Andrew's going to act like he's being inconsistent, but he's not
joining the draft. But yeah, absolutely. I think that if society is on the brink of collapse or something like that, those who are stronger should step up and try to defend that.
What would the equal female duty to this be?
There's not an equal female.
Sorry, Conserve Liberalism says, speaking of shingling, I work with a guy who shot a nail through his boot just to F with me. Turns out he lost 3 toes to a lawnmower years before. That's dope. Packing Turbis Absurdus says, what, me? Get out of it. Is there women and children are more likely to survive a disaster scenario? Men are more likely to yeah, I mean, that was kind of the logic, but we explained the logic more deeply. Christian Valera says, since we're on a Glaze Fest, I like Connor because centrism is based and he's the only streamer that I know that organized a hurricane cleanup event, communitarianism at its best. Well, I swear to God, as soon as we have extraneous income, obviously I need to pay bills first, but the second that we have extraneous income, we're going to go do another community disaster relief event, 100%.
Female duty, and I've had this before. You had the same conversation. There is not a equal female. There's not an equal duty for those who would.
What is there any duty that women have at all?
Yeah, I think so. Same duties that men would have in terms of kindness towards others, being respectful towards others.
Those aren't duties.
Wanting to lift people up. I think it is.
No, it's not a duty to be kind and respectful. We've been disrespectful this whole time. Where's your kindness and duty?
Wait, I think people should be, okay, Andrew, I'm sorry that I wasn't specific enough in saying that you should be generally kind. I don't think that
generally.
Hold on, Andrew, fine.
Come on, dude.
Wait, when I say people have a duty to be kind, what you interpreted that as incorrectly is you have to be kind all the time, which is not true.
Okay, so you just generally think people should be kind.
I think being kind in general is a good thing.
Yeah, but the strong the strong ought to protect the weak.
Sure.
Ought.
Are they always protecting the weak?
No, but you think they always should.
If that situation arises. Yes.
So that would be always.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a monolithic statement for an ought, but it's interesting how you move between the monolithic situation of your ought when it comes to that. But with the second we get to women, suddenly they don't have any of those monolithic oughts. That's very.
So this is something that I want to see answered, is that it's very easy to talk about the oughts for men. And I agree with that. Like, men ought be protective, men ought provide, men ought this, men ought that. But when it comes to women, oftentimes, if you say women ought nurture, women ought have children, women ought care for the future of society, et cetera, because women, feminism has complained that all of these social pressures that have been thrust upon women for millennia are effectively enslaving women to roles that they don't necessarily want to carry out. So it's oppressive to do so. Some people get really wonky with making ought statements when it comes to women, but I don't. Because an ought statement in a free society, you can tell me to pound sand. I can say women ought be nurturing, right? And then a woman, as a matter of fact, one of my exes was not particularly nurturing. She could give me the middle finger and say, I don't think I need to be, you can pound sand. And eventually I did pound sand. Eventually I did dip out. And then because I realized that that's not the kind of person I wanted to be with. And same thing with, you ought to have children. Now, you can say, well, I don't want kids for whatever reason. I want to pursue my career, or I had an abusive childhood, or I did this, or I did that. And you can tell me that in a free society that you're not going to follow my moral prescription. That's perfectly fine. But I'm still going to make the moral prescription from my perspective. And you can explain your moral perspective. These aren't contradictory. Vanessa for Truth says, thank you to whoever gifted the memberships. I didn't even know Connor was live because YT notifications suck. Well, thank you for showing up, Vanessa. I appreciate you. And it was Grassroots Hegemon. So be sure to thank him because he has been insanely generous today. It's very deeply appreciated. But we have to shout out our other kings, Sapient Green and Queens. Pondering, Sapient Green, AD, K Soko, Harmonic, and Christian Valeris also contributed to the stream. So thank you kindly for your financial contributions and also your viewership and also your patronage. It's very much appreciated.
Strange. What monolithic ought do women have?
They don't, because they're not stronger than men. Like what situation?
What other monolithic? Well, there's one thing they can do men can't.
Sure,
what is
reproduce, Andrew.
Yeah, how come that's not a monolith?
Yeah, Vlad the Kebabber. So this is a... Sorry, we're going to go full screen because this is something that I do need to explain, because I think people, they don't clip out of context or whatever, but they do not understand what I mean, and so I need to explain something. Liberalism is probably a 200 to 300-year-old governing philosophy that states that human beings should have maximal freedom, and that the government should intervene in their lives a minimal amount. It's rooted in the term liberal and libertarian, liberty, okay? So libertarians now means anarcho-capitalist, which is very annoying because I would happily identify with the label libertarian if it hadn't been co-opted by psychos. Then, when it comes to liberals, the reason why I don't like adopting the term liberal is because liberals, in my opinion, often tolerate really bad behavior in the name of liberalism. They will say, not all of them, and not anybody in my chat, because everybody in my chat is super based and they have 3,000 IQ, but they will say, well, as long as you're doing drugs, if you don't hurt anybody else, I don't care. That's what a liberal will say. And I will say, drugs are actually bad. Do not do hard drugs because you will screw up your life and you will screw up the lives of other people. A liberal might say, well, be polyamorous and promiscuous as long as you wear a condom, I don't care. Whereas I would say, if you're promiscuous when you're young, that's a fairly normal developmental cycle of young people. But promiscuity for its own sake has a lot of negative, like sociological and physiological effects. So you should keep it to a minimum, and you should try to find your partner or your wife in life, right? So I have very normie, social conservative and fiscal conservative takes that don't align with the modern Democratic Party or the modern understanding of what a liberal is. And so I don't really fit that definition, even though I think that maximal freedom for human beings is a good thing. So that's the difference in liberal versus 200-year-old political philosophy versus liberal modern Democrat. There is a difference here. Yeah, multicultural democracy and liberalism cannot exist. I don't know if that's true. There are syncretic empires like the Greeks in Rome, like Greece and Rome. Rome was a republic for a long time. I think that you can have a syncretic society as long as you agree on the base rules. Yeah. Well, in Vlad, I would accept that as true. I'm just saying most of your ideas are based on liberalism. I agree. But I think most of the founding fathers would be considered conservative by today's understanding of the conservative liberal dynamic, but they were rooting their political philosophy in liberalism 100%. Jack Darko says, Keck, there are no libertarians, just Republicans who like drugs and people who argue the age of consent. Well, and I'm a Republican who dislikes some drugs and tolerates others. So I think I'm just a Republican from 20 or 30 years ago, which is sad. Well, QC says, I still call myself small L libertarian. I just say ANCAPs are my R-slurred little brothers and just give them crayons and they'll be happy. I mean, that's what I do whenever they show up in chat. That's true. So, yeah, I wish libertarian was less poisoned. Does not mean anarcho-capitalist to libertarians. This is myth making. I mean, you say it and you've been very generous, so I'm just going to agree with you. However, when I'm not agreeing with you, let's just say hypothetically I ever disagreed with grassroots hegemon. What I would say is on the internet, if you say libertarian to a libertarian and they start hitting you with ANCAP arguments and you start arguing for statism or minimal intervention or regulation or any of that kind of stuff, they're going to disavow you as a libertarian and you're going to have a fight over libertarianism rather than having a fight over the, like the actual policy. Vlad says you're more of a progressive liberal maybe, but see, here's the thing, Vlad. With Burkean conservatism, which I've also explained on the chat multiple times, Burke has a natural default to institutions and then believes that you should needle progressives and needle liberals as much as possible in order to see whether or not their ideas are worth consideration or if it's a bunch of silly progressive nonsense. And I do find myself doing that a substantive amount of the time. And I also agree with Burke's assessment that that's what a healthy conservatism should be, is needling progressivism and needling liberalism for its weaknesses in order to find things that should be adopted. Whereas progressivism philosophically is oftentimes just identifying a societal problem and then just pursuing it like a rhinoceros until you defeat that problem into the ground. But the problem with progressivism in my mind is that oftentimes they're really poor at calculating secondary and tertiary effects. And so their cures are oftentimes worse than the disease. So I wouldn't go with the progressive liberal. The reason why you say progressive, and I had a conversation with Hutch where he called me a progressive. The reason why he called me progressive was because I'm like chill with trans people and black people and Hispanics. But nowhere is it written in like the philosophy of republicanism or conservatism that you must be individually bigoted or hateful towards gay people, trans people, black people, or Hispanic people. That's not rooted in Burkean conservatism or rooted in libertarianism or rooted in capital L liberalism or rooted in republicanism. There's no tenet that says that you must be prejudiced against people outside of your ethno-religious and sexual tribal group. It correlates, but it's not necessary for the political philosophy. Vanessa says, I bounce on the center and lean right or left, depending on the topic. Republicans don't even exist anymore. It's all MAGA or Trump ass kissers. Well, yeah. And so Case Soko says he's a centrist all day, political philosophy that married values and ideas from both. The problem is centrism itself is poison now, at least even in my mind, because Sargon of Akkad was a classical liberal turned into a total neo-monarchist dickhead. And then Sitch and Adam are absolutely centrist and independent, but no offense, but Adam is not the smartest guy, in my opinion. And so I don't want to associate with labels that they associate with because I feel like it's this ephemeral Trump apologia. Most centrists are ephemeral where they're like, I kind of like this liberal thing. I kind of like this progressive thing. I kind of like this Republican thing. I like weed and somehow I like Trump. That's like centrism nowadays, which sucks. Yeah, it's kind of a semantics day. My apologies. My apologies. I did jump into a semantic philosophical debate. Ecofascism is based. Bill Compson, when I'm feeling particularly edgy, I'm an eco-fascist as well. Oh, yeah. Dave Rubin. BizD says Dave Rubin ruined the term classical liberal. I do think that Dave Rubin and Sargon of Akkad ruined classical liberal. And then also when I looked up classical liberalism has a bunch of associations with free markets, and I do believe in regulation. PF Young seems to be the only truthful centrist. I agree, but even he does some Trump sweeping, right? Sacred Snow, thank you for the $5, King. This is for the interesting talk with Destiny yesterday. Meant to donate, but had to run. Thank you, King. Sargon acknowledges mass demographic replacement is bad, like a rational human. Yeah, that's all he does. All he does is he just notices immigration trends. He doesn't say anything else about criminality or hint at neo-monarchism or fascism or Christian nationalism being necessary to stave off mass immigration. You know, he doesn't simp for authoritarians or sweep for authoritarians. Yeah, Sargon's just a total normie. I'm being sarcastic for those of you who don't know. Now, all right, we still got a few more minutes. I am going to have to go in about 15 minutes. I hate to sabotage my own stream where I tell you guys that I'm leaving in a bit, because then a few people are like, oh, well, if Connor's leaving, then I'm just going to dip out and go watch somebody else real quick. So that does happen, but I do want to be honest, which is that, like I said, my tire burst on my van, and so I have to go replace my tires today. So I'm doing that at 2 p.m. because I have an appointment shortly thereafter. But let's give you a little bit more content before we dip out. I parasocially love you guys. Thank you for being so generous today, and thank you for watching, and thank you for liking the stream.
Because they should not have to have children.
Why?
Because we can have a society where people voluntarily have children without forcing them to do so. We can increase
We can have a
incentives.
society where men don't voluntarily assist anybody with their strength. What do you mean?
We can have a society where
Bud123, it's a little bit more dramatic than that. It's not just a flat tire. The tire actually popped off the rim. So we had to replace it with a donut, and I need to go get a real one.
no one voluntarily does that, but I think we can always use incentive structures to get to that.
Yeah, but you said that they ought. If you agree with me that there can be a society in which men are not interceding on behalf of the weaker sex, in this case, women or children, right? Why ought they do that?
Why ought they do what?
Why ought they do that?
Protect women and
yes,
children?
if women.
Well, Leonidas Vazuras, I don't think that these points are mutually exclusive. It's funny how Sitch is always accused of TDS for the smallest complaint of Trump, yet you describe the show as sometimes sweeping for Trump. Yeah, Leonidas Vazuras, I don't have any problems with Sitch. As a matter of fact, I think that if I ask Sitch a question, he's going to give me a direct answer. And if I ask him a follow-up about his direct answer, he's going to give me an explanation for why he thinks what he thinks. When I do the same thing with Adam Friended, he freaked out, he ran away, he spent an hour, running away from the question. And then when he finally answered it, it was almost identical to the way that I described it. And so I think that Adam 100% has swept for Trump. And then I think that what you're describing, where 60 to 70% of the chat rebels every time that Sitch criticizes Trump, I think that's indicative of what I'm saying. Is that 60 to 70% of the tribe, they don't want to hear anything negative about Daddy Trump. And Adam Friended also, he's like, yeah, like Trump might have been bad in this regard, but actually when you think about it, the Democrats did this. And it's like, aye, bro. Listen, yeah. So sorry, this is relevant. You can spot a grifter, I would say, almost immediately if you follow this pattern of behavior, which is, look if they ever criticize in an earnest way, one, their own political tribe, but then two, anybody quote unquote on their side. If there is a person who exclusively punches in one direction and they have no criticism of their own side, no earnest criticism that is actually substantive of their own side, then you're dealing with a propagandist. And then if you have someone who only criticizes the other side, and they sweep for the bad behavior of their side when it's almost identical, in my opinion, you have a grifter. And the grifter, in my opinion, is somebody who just says whatever they know the audience wants to hear. That's my opinion of what a grifter is. It's not, and grifting, I think, can have degrees where some grifters believe in the ideology they're sweeping for, but they're sweeping for it through political efficacy and rhetorical efficacy. And then there's grifters who actually don't care about the ideology at all. They only care about pleasing a political tribal group for time, attention, and money. So you have to be careful with that, because there are tribalists, propagandists, and I think there's grifters. And sometimes they get mixed up. Vanessa says, I really truly cannot stand Andrew. He is a typical bully who thinks he's winning by being a jerk and strutting like a peacock. I'm so tempted to get into creating content just so I can debate him. Go for it, Vanessa. We'll support you. And then, yeah, and I agree that Andrew has effectively acted like Oliver is being nonsensical when he's made a perfectly coherent point almost the entire time, even when I disagree. John, are you going to do a Space Marine 1 breakdown like you did for 2? Maybe. So, John, I'm noticing that for Space Marine 2, I started at like 30K for the views for breaking it down, but those were the most exciting parts of the Space Marine 2. I do expect when I break down the last stand where all the Space Marines are standing together, that video will probably do better than average. But I'm averaging around 10K for the smaller ones and 30K for the more exciting moments of Space Marine 2. So I think if I go back to Space Marine 1, I'm probably not going to get that good of views. But the truth is that we're waiting for Kill Lupercal to come out on Warhammer TV, and it's just not out yet. So if I run out of content, then maybe I'll break down Dark Tide narratively, and maybe I'll break down Space Marine 1 narratively as well. Sacred Snow says, you shouldn't call yourself a centrist if you don't point out scale and advocate for the greater good. I agree on your grifter point. Cool. And Biz D says, I love the Blocked and Reported podcast because they are lefties with a conservative audience, so they promise not to talk too much about Trump, but they end up not being able to help themselves. True. All right. I do like the lore farm, the videos. They're good for people like me. Cool. All right. Let's give them another few minutes to make hopefully a coherent point that we can grapple with.
Women have no compellence for duties for anything they ought to do.
So hold on. I don't think that you should protect other people because you think you're owed something in return. That's the biggest problem here. I don't think men should protect women because, like, oh my God, I saved you. Now you have to bear my children. I don't.
This is fundamentally stupid, and this is where I wouldn't agree with him at all. Sorry if that you agree with him. I'm not saying that you have to have the kids of the men who protect you from a robber. But what I am saying is that men who self-sacrifice are expecting some kind of social reward where they'll either be valorized, somebody will buy them a drink, somebody will praise them for having good character, a woman will be interested in them. And so when you remove the reward incentive from good behavior, you're effectively saying that we don't need to be reciprocal anymore because people should just be good because it's good to be good. And I think that's a very naive way to view social relations.
Don't think that's how these things work.
Nobody made that conflation that because you saved a woman, they now have to have your children.
Well, you're
but
saying,
however,
you're saying there's a duty.
what I'm saying,
I saved your life, therefore women in general have an obligation to have
on
children.
the monolithic I'm even willing to be super charitable here and say that you didn't mean every single time, but like in most cases, it is the case that men are stronger than women, and so it should intercede on their behalf, right?
Sure.
Right? That would be pretty charitable of me to say, right?
Largely.
Okay, so then if it's the case that women are the only ones who can have children, right? I want you to grant me the same charitability and say, you know what? I'm not saying that all of them ought to have children, okay? But we should make a prescription that they should be moving towards the idea of having children, that's really good for society prescriptively, and that generally speaking, they have a duty to do it.
I think it's a good thing when people have children,
So
including
generally speaking, women have a duty to have.
We're making but here's the thing. Andrew's about to walk away like he has the dub here. But number one, this doesn't contradict his worldview as expressed in the earliest parts of the conversation. And then not just that, there is a moral legal distinction in the word duty. So he's about to act like he has this massive dub.
Have children.
Hi, Jeff Lewis.
I think that society has an obligation to keep its population growing.
So generally speaking, do women have a duty to have children?
Yeah, men and women.
Okay, great. So then women, generally at least.
Actually, Oliver just saved it from a peacocking debate dub because he said men and women both have the duty to procreate. Good save.
Have a duty to have kids.
From his perspective.
I think that individual women are not subject to this because, Andrew, we can have
Oh my God, you keep changing your position. I'm going to have a
No, he doesn't.
smoke while Brian lets chat.
right.
Dude. Fucking. It's like a tube of toothpaste, dude.
All right, we're going to read a couple chats, guys. Just
Okay, based off of that, I'm also going to wrap up. like the stream, engage with the chat. There's lots of really cool, funny, interesting people in chat. If you don't have any money, you don't have the capacity to donate, that's totally fine. Watch the content, engage with the content that you enjoy. That helps out the channel as well.